Screwfierce, one, big up to you. Screwfierce coming at you, but big up, one. Big up to you coming out there on the airwaves. Big up, Rundown Babylon, Wagwan. Big up to you. Bo, come on, team. What's up? Let's go. Tonight we're covering Steven Seagal. We're doing a Steven Seagal 6 stream on a Saturday night. This one's going to be just for fun, y'all. And we're actually looking at a book tonight because we're covering Seagalology by this dude, Vern. And this book is really fun. So we're going to be covering 6 movies here tonight in chronological order. That's Above the Law, Nico, Hard to Kill, Out for Justice, Marked for Death, Under Siege, and Executive Decision. And this covers like the golden era of 90s Steven Seagal movies. And again, we're just doing this for fun. I thought this would be fun because we can kind of cover whatever we want here. And we always kind of try to base it in literature. So I found this book that is like the all-encompassing tome of Steven Seagal. It's an analysis of every Steven Seagal film up to a certain point, and it's really funny. And it's by this dude Vern, I guess, who has a blog or whatever. And I gotta say, like, at first, the book, I'm not doing like a book review, obviously, and I'm not doing a review of the Steven Seagal. We're gonna try and talk about some themes. We might give some ratings. We're gonna give, I don't know. We'll give 7 Aikido wrist breaks to Above the Law, and then so forth. But really, I mean, we're going to talk about some of the themes in the Seagal movies, and I think we're going to find, you guys will find that some of the themes are more revelatory and more relevant than you would have thought. And we're going to talk about all things sort of Steven Seagal, and this is just for fun because, why not? Like we've covered a lot of heavy literature, and we're about to go into some more heavy literature for the rest of March. So I figured we might as well start this one off with, start off the month before the Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March. Right. I am as constant as the northern star, of whose true fixed and resting quality there is no fellow in the firmament. So in the world, the skies are painted with unnumbered sparks. It's March, so we're going to go into some heavy literature. We're covering more Shakespeare, Titus Andronicus. We're going back into Cormac McCarthy. We're going to be doing a Canticle for Leibowitz, Thomas Harris, all this heavy stuff. So we might as well start it off with something fun. And if you are, I don't know, if you're a dude, if you're a person who likes movies, if you have seen the Seagal movies. I mean, here's the thing, like I wasn't really into Steven Seagal movies in the 90s, excuse me, in the 90s. Like until the late 90s, because at the time, and the book talks about this pretty in depth. The book talks about how the action movies of the 80s, and we've talked about 80s movies. Remember, we did High Concept. We talked about Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, and the concept of what makes a big action movie. And of course, Jay's written two books on this. You know, Esoteric Hollywood 1 and 2, and talking about the how the military, you know, the MIC works hand in hand with Hollywood. And so, I mean, when I was a kid, like there was nothing I loved more than an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. I mean, Predator and Total Recall, and especially Commando. Commando was just so badass. Like, were so awesome. And so, like, Steven Seagal movies were kind of like not really my thing or whatever. But then later on in the late 90s and early 2000s, like I don't know why. I think it's because I was sitting there watching Above the Law one time, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so good." So so we're gonna talk about those movies and what they mean in terms of the culture and some inside baseball, I guess, about Seagal. And and there's a lot of good stuff in this book. Like sometimes it can be difficult to find a good movie analysis book. Obviously, Jay's are are the best, but those are on a different level because those are a deeper analysis of films and themes and symbolism. And this is just a fun. This is just kind of a fun, kind of a goofy book. But it does have a lot of good stuff in it. And so we are going to discuss how the movies were made, how some of the characters come about, how the storylines come about, how the funding came about, and and why some of them are so good and so classic. And it's funny because you think of people tend to think of those of Seagal movies, especially those first like four, as kind of interchangeable, but they really are different from each other in a number of ways. And so yeah, we're just going to talk about that. And thanks everybody for 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 being here. And yo, shouts out to my old friend Baxter out there. Baxter says any discussion around Seagal's friendship with Putin or his adoption of the only child of the Panchen Lama in the cards. We're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss a little bit of Seagal and Putin because Putin, because obviously that's come up especially recently. But really, what I'm going to do is focus on the early films, and and it's interesting because Seagal's method, or at least his sort of mission statement, especially in reference to what is it, Hard to Kill, his second film, Hard to Kill. They asked him, "Is this going to be about Americanism?" And, the sort of jingoistic spirit that was alive and well in many of the '80s action films, because the thing was that in the '80s, when you had an action film, you had a Stallone film. I mean, remember, Rambo 3, right? Rambo 3, had the dedication to the Mujahideen in the film, and, of course, the Schwarzenegger movies are all about the sort of jingoistic American, 80s imperialistic, anti-communist spirit, right? But Seagal said in the interview he wasn't interested in that at all. In fact, he was only interested in discussing some of the shenanigans of the corrupt three-letter agencies and how they were funneling um, certain things into the inner city and rotting America. So that was a bold statement from a major movie star, especially in the early '90s. And we'll see that that goes completely against type, really. I mean, this really is one of the first action movies that really specifically deals with that and a critique of Iran Contra. Speaking of my friend Baxter, I might as well I don't think I'm remiss if I was to shill for him a little bit. Our friend here in the chat, Baxter, is the author of an Amazon best-selling book on blockchain. So if you want to know anything about crypto and blockchain, we've got the expert right here. That's my old friend. So, buy his book, Baxter Hines. So, let's go ahead and get into it. So again, the book is by this it lays out the sort of eras of Seagal. The first is the golden era, and that's 1988 to 1991. And I think of these as like 90s movies. These are, I mean, even though his movie era starts in the late 80s, they really are pretty prototypical 90s movies because of what I just mentioned. And how they are different from the big 80s high concept movies, or the movies that come out of Don Simpson's sort of high concept Hollywood era. And then two of the films go into what this guy says is the silver era, and that's Under Siege and Executive Decision. Executive Decision really marks the end of this because remember, an Executive Decision starring Kurt Russell, first of all, Steven Seagal is not the star of the movie. He plays a major role in the movie, and he does something heroic in the movie, but it's not a vehicle for him. And the movie was already a concept before he got involved, and sort of it kind of represents like the end of that era. And then he had a comeback with let's see, he had Glimmerman, Fire Down Below, and then he had a comeback with DMX and Exit Wounds. But we're not going to cover those movies. We're just going to cover the Soul, Steven Seagal, um, vehicle movies. Okay, so first of all, starting off in the introduction here, and I'm going to follow this pretty closely because this guy writes so well that I might as well. I'm going to sort of riff on some of his themes, but I'm going to quote a lot from this book and just read. I could just read this book because it's really funny. And I will say that the book at the beginning annoyed me because I started to get tired of the tone. I think that I'm not saying that he's sarcastic, but I've mentioned how I think that sarcasm is pretty low on the ladder of intelligence for me. Wit and the use of the pun is pretty high up there. I mean, humor in general is sort of high up the ladder of intelligence because one has to be witty and use wordplay. And I mentioned before that's why there are so few comedies made every year. It's so difficult to make a comedy, especially one that lasts. Um, and we see now that comedy, is weaponized, right, in society. I mean, Martin Lawrence, who is also making a weird comeback, but I love Martin Lawrence. I've mentioned that before. I think Martin Lawrence's "You So Crazy" is the greatest stand-up of all time. It's my favorite, and I love Martin Lawrence. And Martin Lawrence was just talking in an interview the other day about how comedy is seen by some people as dangerous, and people can't take a joke, obviously. And as we move forward in terms of uh, our critiques of society, I mean, satire has always been a strong component of sort of high IQ, double entendre, symbolism, and look at the problems in society. But that seems to be way up there in terms of danger. I think that that being I don't know, being facetious or simply being sarcastic is so low. It's such a sort of childish mentality or way of, and that's fine to use it. I'm not saying it's bad to to be sarcastic because especially in terms of your relationship with people or your audience or whatever or your book. I mean, sarcasm can be powerful, but constant sarcasm and especially kind of low tier sarcasm can be off putting. And I got annoyed in the book because he was doing that quite a bit at the beginning, and I started to think, "Okay, is this just gonna be a sarcastic look at Seagal?" But eventually, he sort of I don't know if he grows out of that in terms of his writing and his analysis in this book, but he starts to look at he starts to take a sincere look at the movies, and I think that's it becomes much more potent and powerful, when he does that, and funnier. Pim drops $20 in super chat and says, "My dad once said, 'Judo is the art of using your weight against your opponent.' Judo chop." It made me it made sense to me because my dad was a master at throwing his weight around. Okay, well, all right. I mean, my sister, is a big, critic of taekwondo because taekwondo was very 70s. It's funny because karate was the big popular thing in movies, especially in the 80s. Karate is sort of the all-encompassing term, at least early on for martial arts in movies. And then, of course, judo was, James Bond, and then we had taekwondo, which is in the 70s. My sister's a big critic of taekwondo because my and she has a right to be because my sister is a world champion karate second degree black belt, so she can say that. But um, Steven Seagal brought something new to the stage, and that is Aikido. So we're going to look at what Aikido is. If you want to donate, by the way, you can hit that super chat button. You can hit the dono chat, and I'll see that. It would really help me the most if you could hit that PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, whatever, and get the money, get your donation to me directly if you so choose. I sure would appreciate it. And also, you can just support by leaving a comment afterwards, sharing the stream, liking it, hitting that subscribe button if you haven't done that already. We were on last night with our homeboy David Patrick Harry at Church of the Eternal Logos. Again, I love going over there. I mean, y'all know DPH, and he's our homeboy. He's so awesome. And, we're going to keep going over there and doing some movie analyses, hopefully once a month. That'll be awesome. We did Fallen last night, the Denzel Washington flick, and that was a lot of fun. So check that out. And DPH, of course, has been instrumental in our success over here. He always helps us out a lot. So shouts out to our homeboy, Church of the Eternal Logos. Love you, buddy. Okay, so first off, this starts off with, oh, hold on, sorry. Charisma Mysterian drops $5 super chat, says, you know why there are more Chuck Norris jokes than Steven Seagal jokes? Because Steven Seagal is no joke. Excellent. That's good. Thank you so much for that. I think my sister tried out for the new Karate Kid. That's what the one that Hilary Swank was in back in the day. I was with her when I shouldn't forgive me if sister, if you're watching and I'm giving away too much here, but I was with her when she was when she went to a tournament. My mom and I guess I went with them, but took my sister to a tournament at Disney World. It's the only time I've been to Disney World. I was like 17, and that was where what's the guy's name who was in Twilight, he plays Jacob in Twilight, Taylor Lautner, he was there, and he was competing. A lot of the stunt people, and she continues to be friends with the big time stunt people. He knows John Wick's stunt double and all that stuff, because they come out of the karate world. And I was with her when she auditioned for, he says it was Mortal Kombat, but I'm pretty sure it was Mighty Morphin Power Rangers because I remember that she was trying out for the pink Power Ranger, but she was too young and too small to get the part, because she was, like, 8. Um, no, she would have been I guess she would have been 11 years old, but still, she was too young to do it, but anyway, it was an interesting experience for me seeing that. But Chuck Norris was big, and, Chuck Norris is karate and goes to those tournaments and stuff. Anyway, that was a side note. So, let's see, the book starts off, it says it says you are about to go on a sacred journey. This journey will be good for all people, but you must be careful. Okay. So Steven Seagal says to bring people forward into contemplation. That is his mission statement. Okay. That's his mission statement for his movies. Okay, that's fine. That's cool. Says in interviews, that's what Steven Seagal has often said as the goal of his movies, contemplation. Now, a lot of people don't hold Steven Seagal or his movies in the same high regard that I do. So that may seem like a ridiculous statement to some people, especially everybody who's not Steven Seagal. I mean, what is there to contemplate about a dude in a ponytail and shiny shirts going around breaking wrists and throwing people through windows? Well, I'm not Steven Seagal, but I'll try to tell you. And then he goes into the French invented the auteur theory, right? The idea that the director can be considered the author of a movie, the one who puts his or her personal stamp on the thing, and who deserves most of the credit and blame. But I invented the badass auteur theory. Now, what he's saying here is, this part's a little tedious, but what he's saying here is that, the French and the 60s sort of cinema verite and the 60s um, film movement of France in the 60s. A good movie to watch about that, by the way, would be what is the Bernardo Bertolucci movie, you guys, with Eva Green in it? It's about the twins, and Michael Pitt is in it. Bernardo Bertolucci. It's called the I forget what it's called. I can't think of it because I got too many movies going through my head. If you think of that, put it in the chat. But that movie is good because I mean, it's pretty spicy, but Michael Pitt goes to Paris and is in the he's there when the Paris riots happen, but he's there to see the '60s cinema sort of take shape. And that's a pretty good movie about that. Um, but the auteur theory is exactly what we discussed um, when we were talking about high concept and Don Simpson, because Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer basically said, I think it was when they were talking to, um, what's his face? God, now I can't think of this guy's name. The guy um, who was the '70s studio head. He was friends with Jack Nicholson, and he did Chinatown. What's the producer's name? Guys, help me out. Too many names going through my head. That guy said that the auteur theory was basically BS. A warning, of course, there's going to be a lot of cussing and a lot of talk about Steven Seagal violence in this because it's an action movie, Seagal analysis. So there's going to be some cussing. But that guy, what is his name? Easy Riders, Raging Bulls. That guy, the guy who wrote that book, the big producer. Somebody help me out here. Um, he said basically that the auteur theory was just nonsense. That you can't let a director run away with this with the production and the script because there's too much at stake. There's too much money. There's too many people. There's too much at stake. Now, probably the final result of that would be Francis Ford Coppola and Robert Evans. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, Robert Evans. Thank you, Gershom. So Francis Ford Coppola would be the end result of that, right? Where he said, we had too much money and too much equipment, and we had access to too many or too much power, and little by little we went insane. and and he was talking at the Cannes Film Festival about Apocalypse Now, which we've also covered. And they said many people have said that your film is like Vietnam, and he said our film is not like Vietnam. Our film is Vietnam. That is sort of the climax of the auteur of the film auteur. And then of course we have Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer who have the high concept film, and basically remember there was the part in the book where they were filming Top Gun and they were heavily in communication and contact and working hand in hand with the military and the Pentagon, and they were right off. They were basically Bruckheimer was standing there, and he was taking a break from filming, and the beach was full of people, full of young people, and a reporter came up and said, um, you hope to please these young people with your new rock and roll style of filmmaking. You hope to get a lot of inspiration from them and make a rock and roll film. And he said, no, 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 you got it all wrong. We decide what they like. And that is what the '80s rolled with. That's really what Hollywood rolls with. I mean, yes, they are like a weather vane, but in terms of going with the way that the culture will move. But the really influential films will decide, and they will sort of blow the wind and start to decide the way that people will move and think. That's what predictive programming and culture creation is. Now, I'm not saying that was Seagal, but Under Siege certainly does that. Executive Decision does that in a big time way, which we'll get to. But what this is saying about the auteur is that this kind of morphs into the vehicle for the star, and it is odd that this guy kind of comes out of nowhere and gets this film, not a film franchise because there aren't sequels to these first four films, but he will be given sort of an all-encompassing control and a vehicle, and it's just him. The whole movie is him. It cannot really exist without him. And he's in almost every scene, and it's around his charisma and his sort of star power, and that's interesting. Now, where did that come from? Well, Seagal's own backstory is pretty interesting, because he was born in Michigan. Shouts out to some of our friends out there up in the UP, those Yoopers. I'm not gonna dox them, but they know who they are. Our good friends of this channel who are the Yoopers. And then Seagal moved to California at a very young age. And one thing that he did, which is a little bit it's I don't know whether to criticize this, okay? And what I mean is that people would ask him about his life and, where he was from and did he have these, like did he go to Japan and did he open the first Aikido studio, for a non-Japanese citizen there and, all this stuff. And really I think that the jury's still out on that, whether that's true or not. But what he did was he sort of changed his story back and forth because he was a Hollywood star, and I guess what he's saying is it doesn't matter what his own personal backstory is, as long as because people don't have the ability in general, not us, but other people don't really have the ability to differentiate between the actor and the role that he's playing. So they want to believe that the actor is the role. So like when Steven Seagal says that he's a former CIA contractor and an Aikido seventh Dan master and all this stuff. He I guess he feels like he has to say that because it will give more um gravitas to his film roles, and they'll go see his movies, or maybe it's to hide something um from where he gets the funding for where the funding came from the films. I don't know. But you know, I guess when I say it's difficult to criticize it, it's because like, well, yes, we don't first of all we don't know if he's lying or not, right? And second of all, it's like, well, I mean, that's that's what Hollywood does. Now, that doesn't make it right, but what I'm saying is that there may be some truth to a lot of this. But regardless of that, like, I know that he, joined the Mohawk Nation, and that also may be true. That his mother or his grandmother was 100% Mohawk. Who knows? I mean, really it doesn't matter to me. It only matters that we're looking at the film and the way that the art is in its final product. But one reason that we know that he got these roles is because he was one of the stunt coordinators for Never Say Never Again, and he broke Sean Connery's wrist on the set. So when was Never Say Never Again? Was that 1980? Was that 1983? Remember that was the one-off later that they sort of disavowed, but it's when Connery comes back as Bond. It's a really good film. And then the other reason is because he was he trained a bunch of stars in Aikido. He had a studio in California, and one of these guys was Michael Ovitz. And Michael Ovitz is the like Uber agent in Hollywood. He's like the Ari Gold. He's like Ari Gold times a million. Michael Ovitz is one of the big time guys in Hollywood. And Seagal trained him kind of like Bruce Lee did with in the late 60s and 70s with some of these guys. But because I guess Michael Evans took a shine to him or whatever their thing was, um, that helped Seagal sort of transition into the movies and get his own roles. So um this says the book says um let's see. Seagal once said, "I haven't always been dealt scripts that were palatable and movies that I thought were even makeable. And I think one of the secrets of my success is that I changed them into something that was almost watchable. These scripts are written for him or by him, or they are written to fit him, so they always end up featuring some of his obsessions: enlightened men with shadowy CIA pasts, Westerners with expertise in Asian ways, Aikido, swords, herbology, Buddhism, various types of mafia, Italian American, European, Asian, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. Um, let's see, music, bluegrass, blues, reggae, much of it performed by or written by Seagal himself, and the protection of animals or the environment, which will come up especially in um, On Deadly Ground and what's the other one? Fire Down Below, but we're not covering those. On Deadly Ground, otherwise known as ODG. And then there's his politics. From the very beginning, his movies have had themes of an out of control CIA trafficking drugs into the country, rogue secret agents turning into terrorists, corporations pillaging the land, and indigenous cultures, the types of things you didn't usually see in action movies at the time and that you saw a lot more of in real life as the years went by. Um, you also find that his movies kind of take a lot from what Die Hard did to Hollywood because Die Hard is a completely different type of action film. Under Siege, especially, is basically um, kind of it's like Die Hard on a ship, right? Kind of like Days of Thunder was, Days of Thunder, like, but at NASCAR instead of with jets. And that's the way that, I guess these Hollywood studio people think. Okay, give me a three a three a 3-word breakdown of what you're selling me. What is the movie about? Okay, it's a Top Gun at NASCAR or whatever. Right. 4 words, but whatever. Um, you'll find evidence of one-liners both wonderful and hilariously awful. Lines like this is my favorite line in Steven Seagal. I'm going to take you to the bank, Senator Trent, to the blood bank. It's so awesome. Yeah, so it says Seagal had an interesting life. He was the first foreigner to run an Aikido dojo in Japan. He broke Sean Connery's wrist teaching him martial arts for Never Say Never Again. He hosted Saturday Night Live. I'll talk about that in a little bit because we just did our Norm stream and that was mentioned in the Norm stream. Um, he was declared the reincarnation of a Buddhist Lama. There you go, Baxter. He was blackmailed by the mob and allegedly wiretapped by notorious private eye Anthony Pellicano. Yeah, and I'm not making any of this up. This is all coming from the book here that I'm quoting. Um, and let's see. So let's go into Above the Law. Above the Law, yeah, that's in Hard to Kill. Above the Law is mentioned in I'm sorry, Above the Law is known as Nico in the UK, and I only know that because I had a VHS copy of Nico, that I got with my friend David when I lived in Belfast, and we used to watch this movie, like, every night. It's so good. Um, so it says, the quote from Above the Law that it starts off with the sort of, epigraph is, "Nico, why is the CIA calling you at 2 in the morning?" Most of the big action heroes had to start out small and build their way up. A year before Rocky, Sylvester Stallone was still taking roles like young man in Crowd in scenes cut out of Mandingo, right? Did you know that? The Italian stallion. Um, Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, had Hercules in New York, as well as bit parts like Muscle Man in an episode of the TV show San Pedro Beach Bums and Lars, gym instructor in Scavenger Hunt. Jean-Claude Van Damme not only played an Ivan Drago knockoff in No Retreat, No Surrender, he can also be spotted as a background dancer in Breakin'. Breakin' 2 is the great classic. And then, of course, Chuck Norris didn't do much for co-starring with Bruce Lee in Way of the Dragon. Way, not Enter the Dragon, Way of the Dragon. Um, but Above the Law is directed by future Academy Award nominee for Best Director Andrew Davis. Above the Law is the blueprint for the rest of Seagal's career. Um, let's see. This says Seagal plays ex Aikido instructor, ex CIA Vietnam vet, Chicago vice sergeant turned vigilante Nico Toscani, or as the trailer narrative describes him, Nico Toscani. He's a covert agent trained to survive in Vietnam. He has a master's 6th-degree black belt in Aikido and family in the mafia. He's a cop with attitude. The attitude of his will come in handy when he stumbles across a CIA drug smuggling operation that blows up the priest at his church and plans to assassinate a senator. Like many cops in the movies in the 70s and 80s, Nico gets pulled off the case, but he pursues it anyway with attitude. So, Above the Law is sort of a cop movie about the Iran Contra scandal, but more than that, it's about introducing the world to Steven Seagal. He's been around Hollywood a little bit, teaching Aikido to powerful agent Michael Ovitz, which we mentioned. And it says, okay, so about the voiceover. Next, the voiceover explains that Nico's skills and a chance meeting led him to this is kind of Boomer Garcia. It led him to doing work for the CIA, and there's a funny montage of the Vietnam War and peace marches with badly dubbed chanting and that type of electric guitar that is supposed to remind you enough of Jimi Hendrix that you know it's the 60s. That's that is how the that's how the montage and Above the Law goes, right? He was in Vietnam. Now the revolution's over, but he's a cop with attitude and he's friends with the mafia. Rated hard R. Um, and it says So there it is. The American so amazed by martial arts that he moves to Japan, trains for years, and against all odds becomes a teacher himself, then starts freelancing for the CIA. This is Nico's backstory, and it's similar to the background Seagal assigned to himself in interviews at the time. Um, but like the 60s montage, it's a combination of real and phony. Seagal is not from Sicily, he's from Lansing, Michigan. But he really did go to Japan as a young man, and he may have really hung around in the general vicinity of the founder of Aikido. And later, he definitely did run an Aikido school, unheard of um, in Japan. However, Seagal's claims and innuendo about working for the CIA are at best unverifiable, as they would be. It says, okay, this is just page 5 of the book. It says, at the end of the credit sequence, there's a clip of Richard Nixon quoting Lincoln is saying, "No one is above the law. No one is below the law, and we're going to enforce the law, and Americans should remember that if we're going to have law and order." And so that's interesting. Did you know that above the law, I mean, really, when you think of above the law, it's supposed to be an allusion to the Magna Carta, right? The 1215 and the Magna Carta, and no one's above the law. But this one is different because Nixon, this is actually a Nixonian quote, and it's especially interesting because a lot of Seagal's films will kind of the past is prologue, right? So the prologue to a lot of his films is basically the chaos of the 60s and the Boomer Garcia era combined with the shenanigans of the three-letter agencies and moving into this kind of 90s society. Now, this is relevant to today because, of course, that will be, especially in like a Dave McGowan sense, this will be the precursor in terms of culture creation in the way that we see things moving today. Um, but it also shows you in many senses that things haven't changed. It says, um, this cuts directly to the villain, Kurt Zagon, played by Henry Silva, on the border between Vietnam and Cambodia during the war, of course. Clearly not thinking about the importance of law and order. We don't know yet that he's a brutal interrogator and torturer and that his mission is to get back some missing opium, or that in the future he'll still be in the CIA and using Coke money to fund a secret invasion of Nicaragua. But we still know he's up to no good. And let's be honest, it's so obvious that the CIA is corrupt. And if they're gonna hire a guy who looks like Henry Silva, I mean, look at the guy's face. Don't tell me they don't know that motherfucker is evil. So true. I mean, you look at this guy and you're like, one thing about the casting in these movies is like they really do a great job with central casting. They're like, look, we need to find a guy who is the Alfred McCoy, Golden Triangle, um, Lansdale associate, Klaus Barbie of the Vietnam era, who is pissed off about his missing opium, and who's running the Montagnards, but who's got to be trafficking into the inner city, and who's also the bad guy in Ghost Dog: Way of the Samurai. Who can we get? Let's get this fucking guy who looks like Skeletor, but he's a real guy. I mean, it's so true. And then there he is, Nico Toscani, the first ever Steven Seagal character. According to the script, we see from Nico's gait that he is athletic, a born leader, and totally at home in the jungle. I'm not sure I really get all that from his gait, but fair enough. He is totally at home in the jungle. He's not at home, however, with these crazy CIA bastards like Zagon. Nico is the naive rookie who gets upset when he encounters Zagon and other agents doing chemical interrogation on some POWs, not for war purposes, but to find out who fucked with their opium. At first, and that's what he says in the movie. At first, Nico tries to play along, but his conscience won't let him. Also, he's wearing a cool scarf. So, what happens in the movie is we get the montage and we get the sort of knockoff Hendrix music. We get that again in Under Siege, by the way. I mean, they literally play Voodoo Child, and and he says like "Welcome to the Revolution," says Gary Busey, and the CIA guy back in the war room is like, "The revolution is over, man. Things have changed, man." Right to Tommy Lee Jones, and in this one we're in the jungle. We're in Apocalypse Now territory mixed with I don't know, mixed with sort of Air America based Mel with Robert. If you haven't seen Air America, not a bad movie. It's got based Mel and RDJ in it. And of course, that one's based on, Alfred McCoy, Politics of Heroin type stuff. where, they go back to America and then Southeast Asia kind of mixed in one and based on a real thing, right? Air America. This one is Seagal is uh, he's I guess he's like a SEAL or he's a Green Beret who would be the part of the paramilitary special activities, special operations directorate, uh, paramilitary guys, and he's captured some guys, and then in comes Zagon, Henry Silva, and he is the chemical interrogation specialist. He starts torturing this guy, saying how I'm going to cut you, man, or whatever, and he's got this knife. Seagal gets pissed and then says, "I'm out of here," and he quits. Well, then fast forward years later, and we're back in America, and we know we're going to run across him because Seagal even says in the movie to his friend, who, by the way, his friend in the movie, who is also an operator, is this old guy. It's always an old guy, and the guy they haven't aged when they get back to America. It's 20 years later. But he says to the guy when he's in Nam, he says, "I'm gonna go, I'm gonna go ice this guy right now. If I don't do it, he's gonna come back, man." And he says, "No, man, you can't do that." So he quits and he walks away, right into the jungle. Um, Flash forward to the present where Nico Toscani, is a Chicago cop with a sassy female partner named Jax, the great Pam Grier, and a crying wife, the crying Sharon Stone. Sharon Stone cries almost the entire movie. This is before, let's see, is this before Total Recall? I guess it was after Total Recall or around the same time as Total Recall. But then this guy says, that probably gave her a sizzle reel for her audition for Casino years later, where she plays essentially the same kind of character, but to the max. Um, and let's see, we also get some sort of Godfather 2-esque mafia scenes. It says, like the wedding sequence in The Godfather Part 2, we meet the whole family because it's a christening ceremony for Nico's daughter. And then there's a big party. We learn that half of Nico's relatives are cops and the other half are the mob, and they don't mingle much at the barbecue. It's not clear in the movie why they included the mafia angle, except that Seagal had a fascination with the mafia. Years later, ironically, alleged members of the Gambinos would try to extort him in real life. So says this book. Um, and let's see. So what that's supposed to show is that, of course, that Nico is three-sided, right? For one, he's a patriot no matter what in the movie, but he's in touch with the gruff reality of the streets, but he's also law and order, and he's also like military. So he's sort of three-sided. But uh he's able to, get his resources from anywhere. Now, one thing it brings out on the next page here on page 7, it says Nico leaves the party taking Jax. Jax is the great character in Mortal Kombat 2. But also Jax is Pam Grier, and this analysis brings out an interesting interpretive side note into the film, which is that he seems to be clearly having an affair with his partner. And of course, Pam Grier plays his partner Jax, and it's her last week. It's always their last week. One more job for the bank robber, or it's man. I was supposed to retire, right? And they just happen to come upon like the biggest case ever right before they're about to retire. Uh, let's see. So Nico leaves the party, taking Jax with him, telling the family he has to go to work. And then he tells Jax he has to take a piss and he goes into the bar. But instead, he starts roughing up the dudes hanging out at the bar, including, uh, it's funny he mentions this Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer's Michael Rooker, who has one line. That's interesting. Michael Rooker is in Cliffhanger. And of course, he plays Brothers to the Bone, right, McMasters? Not this time. Right, he's in, Tombstone. He's the curly-headed guy in Tombstone, but he has a bit part in this as a guy at the bar, and it's interesting they bring out Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, because they're about to bring up Bush Senior, and remember, Henry Lee Lucas, that's a good boy. That's a good boy, says W. Um, and this is the first full-fledged cigar he played Henry Lee Lucas in that movie. Um, let's see, first full-fledged bar scene and the beginning of a tradition of fights in bars. The bartender is memorable loudmouth asshole yelling, "Holy shit, man, stop this motherfucker. He's crazy." So scares him enough that he gives up which room the cousin and the pimp are coking out in. Nico kicks the door down and stages an intervention, shoving the pimp's face in a table of coke. This guy gets so desperate to not go to the jail, he tries to butter up Nico by telling him about the big shipment he heard coming in. So basically, when he was at the party, he's wondering, where his niece or his cousin or whatever, where she is. She's much younger. And then he goes, "Hold on, Jax. I gotta run in here in this bar." And he starts kicking ass. "Hey, anybody seen my niece?" He starts showing the picture of her. And all the creeps at the bar make real creeper comments. Really weird. But you instantly hate them and you want Seagal to start, whooping ass. So so he starts kind of like throwing people around including the bartender who's, again, this loudmouth asshole, and who is listed in the credits as CIA bartender, which is funny because he's gonna pop up later. He's a guy with a full-on late '80s, my friend Brad and I used to call this a skunk wig. He's got a full-on skunk wig mullet, okay, and this guy, he's a real jerk, okay? So Seagal goes upstairs and he sees, this young, mafiosi or whatever in the most, like, just decadent every drug is in this room, and he's got this girl in there, and Seagal's like, "What are you doing in here?" And she's like, "Why don't you get out of here, Nico? Why did you leave me alone?" And he's like, "What, you like doing drugs?" And he gets the guy's face, and he shoves it into a pile of coke, and the guy's you just know the guy's gonna go, "Okay, it's not so bad," you know? And there's like syringes and powder and just shit all over this room, right? So he kicks this guy's ass, and he's like, "That's my niece." And then the guy basically tells him out of nowhere, I guess because he's so messed up, he's like, "Look, look, there's a big shipment coming in next week." And he's like, "Oh, a big shipment coming in. Where? Where's the big shipment?" Because Seagal's doing his Chicago, is sort of a Chicago, mafia, New York accent. It's kind of between the two or whatever. But then the guy's like, "Where do you think it's gonna be? It's gonna be at the dock. It's gonna be at the dock with all the dock workers in the nameless warehouse. Of course, that's where all the shipments come in, right?" So he's like, "Okay, all right, I'll take a look." So Nico drags out his cousin and the pimp, and Jax says to him, "Boy, Nico, you got some strange toilet habits." What a weird line. Before long, Nico and Jax and the cohorts are dressed up as meat packers waiting to bust this shipment. After Seagal's first big car chase scene, where he holds onto the roof of a high speed car and punches through the side of the window to grab the driver. Have you guys ever tried to punch through the window of a car? I know that's a weird question, but I I've, I actually, this is weird, but I actually did a play where when I was in school, where I played this like motorcycle hit guy who beats up a pickup truck, and we had a pickup truck on stage, and this was fun because it was an old pickup truck on stage, and I had a crowbar, and I got to just beat up this pickup truck just any way I wanted. And I remember smashing the glass and the side windows out of this pickup truck, and it took a couple of whacks. I mean, there's no way you could punch through the tempered glass of a car unless you're Steven Seagal and you're riding on top of it, right? Um, so anyway, it says they open up the crates and discover that the shipment isn't drugs but military explosives. Nico knows enough about explosives that he's able to sniff them and declare C4, my man. Right? But he is a former military contractor, so I guess he would know that. He knows the Semtex by the smell. Soon he finds himself following the traffickers to his own church, but he has to let them go because Father Gennaro starts talking to him, and it would be socially awkward not to go into the basement with the man to find out what he has to say about the Nicaraguan, El Salvadoran, and Chilean refugees he stashed down there, because the priest is stashing these immigrants, and put I am a political refugee, I'm a political prisoner, down in the basement. And this is interesting because when the movie was made, I mean, this is like very soon. This is like at the time of Iran Contra. And remember the John Stockwell interviews talking about El Salvador, Guatemala, and Operation Condor and the CIA operations. in South America and Central America. Also, I guess James Woods was in Salvador in 1986. That was the Oliver Stone film, which is also about that, about the death squads and stuff. So that was 1986. That was 2 years before, but I guess it's kind of taking a notion from that. But again, this is pretty groundbreaking in a way because it's different from it's totally different from, well, I guess, okay, so Predator is 1987, and that is set in South America, and we have elements of that. I mean, that is obviously supposed to be a kind of a, a paramilitary, slash SEAL Green Beret CIA operation in South and Central America, where they are fighting a, alien or slash, DARPA rogue warrior winter soldier with body mods, however you look at Predator. And remember at the beginning of that film, he mentions it specifically. What's the matter, Dylan? The CIA got you pushing too many pencils? He used to be someone I could trust. Remember that? But anyway, he goes downstairs and he finds these people stashed. And then later, what happens is he runs into the old agency friend. And this will be a trope in many action movies, but especially in Steven Seagal. And it says, like most Steven Seagal movies, the plot gets pretty complicated, but unlike the later ones, the story unfolds naturally enough that it's easy enough to follow Father Gennaro's friend, Father Tomasino, and he's learned through the South American refugees about a CIA plan to kill the senator who's investigating their activities in Nicaragua. Pretty complicated, actually, especially for a Seagal movie, right? The woman who left so he goes to. So then what happens is Nico is in church with Sharon Stone and his little baby, and he sees a strange woman all alone at the church, a good-looking woman who, has, shifty eyes, and she leaves her Bloomingdale's package on the floor. Of course, we all now in post, Big 9 era world, if any of us saw this, we would immediately, our senses would go off. Right, you see this strange woman being shifty-eyed, leaving a package, and then hurrying out of the church before the service is over. But in 1988, only Steven Seagal, Nico Toscani knows what's happening, and he says, "Get down!" And there's a bomb, and the bomb is in the church. Now, this is based on a real life event, of course, that occurred in El Salvador, where a number of real events, and it occurs in the movie Salvador. But where they the death squads were assassinating priests, and so the bomb goes off, and then Nico is told by his superiors to back off. So he gets mad and kicks a chair. When he stays on the case, he gets suspended. A rare "I want your badge and your gun" scene for Seagal, but gets out a stash of guns he's hidden somewhere and keeps investigating. Okay, because that's the trope in the action movies, right? I want you, give me your shield and your piece. Right? I want you off this case. You're gonna take that's 5 days paid leave, right? Of course, he's just gonna go home and get his other piece, and he's not gonna need his shield, and he's just gonna go out and keep investigating. That's every movie. Herman drops $10 super chat, says, "Where does the elevator scene from Mark for Death fall on BLA's top Seagal kill scenes? Patrice O'Neill talking Seagal on O and A is great." Oh man, R.I.P. Patrice. And shouts out to our homeboy out there, the real John Connor, who's another big Patrice O'Neill fan. And cheers to you, homeboy. Thank you for that super chat. Well, honestly, the um the death scene in Mark for Death, the final death scene with Screwface, is probably, a lot of people mark that as like the best death scene in a Seagal movie, and we're gonna get to that. I think that um I think that the way that he ends Tommy Lee Jones is pretty good. But let's see, is it Hard to Kill has one of the best because it has the best line in it. "Fuck you and die," he says. Um, b Excuse my language, but we're doing a hard R. We're doing hard R. Hard R. Steven Seagal. That's the Steven Seagal as detective. It's starring Steve. This is Nick Mullins' bit, starring Stephen Dorff as Detective Eric Fuck in Fuck the Law. Rated hard R. Steven Dorff. Steven Seagal. If you haven't seen that, look up that bit. But yeah, and Jason says that trope is really well done in Narc, the Jason Patrick Ray Liotta film. That's an underrated film. That's a pretty good film. Gritty, gritty, grim reality of the streets. But yeah, that occurs in. I mean, that's in Basic Instinct. It's even in Fallen that we just covered last night with Cotizi, right? Um, and so okay, so it says, let's see. So he, especially in the golden and silver eras of Seagal movies, so he finds his old agency friend. Now, the old agency friend is a trope that occurs probably. I wrote a note here in the book that the best example of the old agency friend is in the movie Ronin, which is an excellent movie. Ronin was 1998, wasn't it? Oh, that was 1998. That's the year Fallen came out. So this is 88. But Ronin has the old agency friend, and I wrote, "This gets subverted." I can't read my note here. This gets subverted for the plot in the movie Ronin because what happens in that is spoiler. Well, who cares? Is that Robert De Niro's character has to find where he has to find the location of Skarsgård and where he's gone with the case. Right? Get the case. Get the case. And so he contacts his old agency friend when they're in Nice. But in that movie, what happens is, and that's a great that really is a really well it's John Frankenheimer. It's got the best, in my opinion, like the best car chase scenes. I mean, a lot of people think that it's not an original opinion, of any movie, except for maybe later. Like I love the car chase scenes in the movie Drive. That's a obviously that is built around that, but but in that one he goes and finds the agency friend. But it turns out that that is supposed to throw us off the scent of what's happening in the plot because later on in the movie, what happens again, spoiler, is that we find out that Robert De Niro says, "I never left. I never left. Don't you get it? I never left." So he's pretending to be, and the title tells you that he is a masterless warrior. He's a masterless, wandering samurai without. He's a samurai without a master. But it turns out that that is just it's fake. That he's actually just infiltrating this group of mercenaries, assassins, and he is working for a group of shadowy people trying to find a case. The case is linked to. It turns out, which is really interesting and relevant for me, especially watching this in the late '90s. What turns out to be related to the IRA. The IRA has a hit list, a kill list, and the CIA needs to find it and deliver it to MI6. So he hasn't actually left the CIA. So his old agency buddy is actually just his handler. So that's pretty cool. Jason says, if I ever sponsor a BLA stream, we'll have him do Bringing Out the Dead. Bringing Out the Dead is an underrated Scorsese flick. Great. What's Bring Out the Dead? 1995. Ving Rhames, Nicolas Cage. Underrated flick. Pretty hallucinatory. That's a great flick. If anybody does want to sponsor a stream, we got another sponsor stream today. Shouts out to let's see. Shouts out to Jonathan who sponsored a stream today, and so if you want to sponsor a stream, and we've got a couple coming up this month. We still got to do our Wes Anderson sponsor stream, and we got to do what's the other one? Canonical for Leibowitz. We're going to be doing that later. But if you want to sponsor a stream, please donate through PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, and give me a few ideas, please. You got to donate. I asked for $100 for a sponsor stream because I give a lot of time to this, but I'm also like running out of time to be able to do this. So you got to give me a bunch of ideas and things to choose from because sometimes the ideas that people give me for sponsor streams are always great, but sometimes you guys they are I have my reasons for not choosing certain things, and especially because of the platform we're on. Some things we just can't do, or I just don't want to do them, or I don't feel like they're relevant. So, but that's up to me. So, but please, just give me a few ideas if you want to do that, and that'd be great if anybody wants to. So getting back to above the law, um, Let's see. It says throughout the entire course of his training and teaching, Seagal's goal was to develop and refine the ultimate street style, the most practical combative art for modern applications. Seagal's fast, blunt style of fighting immediately stands out as an unusual approach to fight choreography. Um, and he talks about how this guy's favorite is the one where a bunch of dudes get out of a car and surround Nico with a gun, 2 machetes, and a baseball bat. It takes Nico about 3 seconds to get rid of the gun, steal a machete, and turn it into a sword fight. He beats them silly and chases the last guy down an alley, scaring the guy so badly he starts to scream, "Don't kill me." Coincidentally, a very tall acquaintance of the crying man happens to be hanging out in the corner. This is a great part of the movie. And the guy says, "Hey," so he beats up these guys, right? And this is a great part of Above the Law because there's like a group of it's like 2 black guys and this white guy, like, not at work at his construction job, huge guy. He's smoking a cig. He puts out a cig. "Hey, that's my buddy." And he walks up. "What are you gonna do about it, pal?" And he like pokes him, and Seagal just goes, "Oh, okay." And he stomach punches the guy so hard that he falls down. And when he walks past the 2 other dudes, they're like, "Hey, my man, leave me alone." It's a weird scene in the movie. But they just added that because and it's great because there's not like a dull moment in these movies. One of the criticisms of action movies in general is that there's not enough character development. And that's true, um, I guess in the largest respect of looking at some of the action films, so many movies are produced, right? There's so many movies produced, and so many of them are forgettable. But the great action movies, the character development is driven by the action. So, for instance, the character development is amazing in something like Predator, where we get to know the characters because of the situation that they're in. We don't need to know their backstories with their families or any of this stuff. We only need to know what they're doing in this situation, and because when you think about their lives, like that their life is synthesized into what their role is right there. What is their mission? So we get to see like that when they're on this operation, it's the crucible of their existence. That everything that is best or worst about them is brought out and brought to light. And so that's what the movie really does really well. Movies do that really well in terms of action movies that succeed. And you know, the Seagal movies kind of bypass that in a way, but it doesn't matter because we don't need tons of scenes of him going back and seeing his family crying. The movie Hard to Kill, of course, is about that. That's what drives the plot. But we only need a few seconds of that to get the way that it works. We need to be shown the things, right? We don't need to be told and led along like we're infantile viewers, which is the way that the movies generally treat their audiences, and probably for good reason. Um, let's see. This says, um, let's see. He talks to this dude in prison. The fights are more brutal than many martial arts movies. Oh, it talks about the score in the movie. And it's got David M. Franks' typical 80s score, drum machines, guitar noodling, and popping keyboard bass lines, right? It's got that that's the way Under Siege the score in Under Siege starts off. It's got this weird like drum machine mixed with like this kind of jazz element. Now, a lot of Seagal movies will take their influence from the blues, right? Because Steven Seagal another thing is, excuse me. Another thing is that Seagal, if you guys didn't know, for a long time was the highest paid guy in Hollywood, not because he was making $20 million paychecks for being an actor, but because he wrote, produced, created, ran, starred in, later directed, and also did the music for his films. So he had like sort of this all again, it was a vehicle for Seagal, right? Um, and yes, John Pro says people like Seagal because he had slick back hair and he broke bones in sickening fashion. Yes, and that's one of the things. That's one of the reasons that I love his movies is that they he must have known that what people want when they're watching an action movie is this is also this is prior to the era of jump cuts, right? So we don't have action movies where I'd say the most egregious example of that would be like with Paul Greengrass and the Jason Bourne movies, because the Jason Bourne movies are real. I like them, and I especially like them because they're so revelatory for stuff. But the annoying thing is the 2000s jump cut, right, where the frame never lasts more than like half a second. And I get that at times the form and the content have to work to produce meaning. So it's like we get a jump cut at the beginning because we're seeing the kind of faded, swirling vision of the amnesiac, MK Ultra guy, the MK Delta Jason Bourne, trying to get his bearings. But we only need that a little bit. We don't need that for the whole movie. What Seagal does in his movies is he leaves it on an extended frame so we see all of the action. For instance, it's almost like theatrical in terms of like you're watching a play because like when he has a fight in a bar or when he has the fight in like the sausage shop in Out for Justice, which is great. We see the characters and they kind of are in a there's like five characters and they're in a circle and Seagal has to fight each one of them. There are only so many places for the camera to go. So we are forced to look at the violence on the screen. And it's great because everything that you, especially as a dude, want to see in an action movie and want to see happen to these people, he will answer for you. He will provide for you. The thing about his ponytail, which is weird, is that Seagal does this thing where he's I think he's a lot of people will criticize that the way that he looks and some of the things that he does, and like they kind of take that to the extreme with Under Siege in terms of like that he's a cook. Oh, he's a cook. He's just a cook. He's a cook. They say it like a million times. Or like in Out for Justice when he finds the puppy. So it's this sentimental thing, right? But what it does is it kind of creates a fuller character because really the hardest action character is the one who balances his violence with a sense of like um sort of personal emotion and delicacy. And of course Seagal takes it to another level like with his like care for animals in some of his movies. We're going to talk about like when he lets the horse out and he's like we see like a 3-second shot which is long in the film for him letting this horse go. And even when he did his environmental stuff, like when he did Saturday Night Live and he's beating the people up in the boardroom and there's like, all the corporate labels behind him. And he looks directly at camera and he says, "This is what you get when you mess with the planet." And you're like, okay, that's a little weird. But his mixing of, herbology, like his Eastern herbology and his acupuncture in Hard to Kill, sort of gives us a sense that like he's almost like a spirit warrior or something, right? Um, and so okay, so it says, oh yeah, so I talked about the score. He does it in Under Siege. Unlike Seagal, let's see, we see this movie has, like, real retired police officers, like this guy Joseph Cosala, who is this mustachioed guy who's you can see it in the movie, is clearly not an actor. He's like, "Hey, Nico, what do you want me to do?" And then that guy appears later in Under Siege. He's like, "What? No Miss November? You guys bring her?" Or whatever. And so this is, like, somebody that Seagal must have known and decided to put into the film. Um The director of this movie, though, it says, Andrew Davis had already made a few movies, the most recent one having been 1985 Chuck Norris vehicle Code of Silence. In 1992, he would raise Seagal briefly to the level of mainstream blockbuster movie star courtesy of the film Under Siege. The next year, he'd get Best Picture and Best Director Oscar nominations for The Fugitive, which is interesting. It is interesting that Andrew Davis directs Above the Law and then goes on to be an Oscar-nominated director for, The Fugitive, which, by the way, is what broke Tommy Lee Jones in terms of the mainstream. I mean, he got his Oscar for, The Fugitive. I don't care. Remember that part? Uh, but Tommy Lee Jones really probably got that role because he was in Andrew Davis's movie Under Siege, where really he is the star of the movie. I mean, yes, it's a Steven Seagal vehicle, but Tommy Lee Jones gets, like, way more screen time in Under Siege, and he plays a fuller sort of last night somebody asked about what is camp acting? What is what does it mean to be camp? And it's like ham acting, and that is what Tommy Lee Jones is in Under Siege. He is a ham actor, like, in extremis. Um, okay, so let's see. Page 14 of this book says, um, adding the CIA into the picture is important in itself. The corruption in Code of Silence is isolated. A drunk fuck up cop shoots a kid by accident and plants a gun on him, which is in the Nick Mullen bit. But that occurs in Above the Law in terms of adding the CIA. And the theme of corrupt here we go. The theme of corrupt intelligence agencies and the complicated intrigue continue to this day, but the way they're presented is pretty different. In the early films, they tend to follow Above the Law's lead by using a monologue or speech where Seagal lays out his feeling about the topic. In later films, he still does that occasionally, but it always feels like an improvised bit of dialogue inserted by Seagal to put his fingerprints on the movie and not a deliberate dramatic moment in the screenplay. Um, let's see. Oh, yeah. Okay. Here we go about his interview. It says Seagal took the politics of the movie seriously, saying in the press notes, "This is not a martial arts film. It is based on a true story about CIA complicity in narcotics trafficking for the purpose of funding covert operations," which is pretty hardcore for a star to say in 1988 about his movie. I think that's pretty amazing that he said that. Let's see. We get Iran Contra. On a let's see, it says a lot of people tend to lump Seagal in with Chuck Norris, Jean-Claude Van Damme, and maybe on a good day Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone, but none of those guys were making movies like this, especially not with this point of view. If their pictures had a political edge, they tended to be about fighting communists, about re-winning the Vietnam War, or about having to break through liberal bureaucracies to fight out of control urban crime. These movies were part of the Reagan years, sharing the worldview of the administration. Above the Law was a response to the Reagan years, calling for an end to some of what was going on. It's pretty wild, isn't it? The screenwriters clearly wanted the audience to see the connection between the plot of the movie and the Iran Contra scandal that was brewing at the time. In the scene where the sleazy lawyer Salvano meets with FBI agent Neely, and Neely gets a call from the CIA to let Salvano's clients go, the script even specifies that pictures of Reagan and Meese are prominent on the wall. If you check the movie, sure enough, there's a photo of Ed Meese on the wall, although the photo of Reagan is cropped out of the shot. Seagal's alleged CIA background, if it were verifiable, would have lent some extra weight to the movie's portrayal of a rogue agency. But that extra credibility wasn't really necessary considering how prominent the Iran Contra affair still was in the headlines. The movie was released less than 5 months after Congress released its final report on the scandal, and less than 1 month after Oliver North and John Poindexter were indicted on multiple charges. Even so, the movie was ahead of its time. The media attention revolved around the arms for hostages part of the scandal and how the money from selling arms to Iran was used to fund terrorist Contra army. It wasn't until 8 years later. Here we go. It's pretty based. It wasn't until 8 years later that investigative reporter Gary Webb's Dark Alliance series in the San Jose Mercury News revived talk about drug money funding Reagan's beloved Contra freedom fighters. The article later expanded into a book, didn't quite describe the scenario shown in Above the Law with CIA agents themselves running drug empires to fund a secret invasion. Instead, Webb's work detailed exhaustive evidence of Nicaraguans coming to Los Angeles, supplying yayo to the new crop of crack kingpins and funneling their profits to the Contras, possibly with the knowledge and wink, wink, nudge, nudge of the three-letter agencies. Um, and then it says, in 2004, of course, Webb was found dead of he um he was found dead of a Hillary Crimeton being depressed and shoosting himself twice in the back of the head event. Let's call it that. Um, the CIA had conducted an investigation on itself and released a two-part report, which initially denied evidence of the claims, but then on the other hand described how the CIA had protected more than 50 Contras and drug traffickers from federal investigation in order to support the Contra war. Now, non-surprisingly, the mainstream media, interpreted the report to mean innocent of all charges but guilty. Okay, all right. So, a couple of things that I wrote here. Dark Alliance, Gary Webb, Kill the Messenger. Right, is the film with Jeremy Renner. Um, speaking of Jason Bourne, the best Bourne movie is the one with Jeremy Renner, in my humble opinion, because it's like It's the super soldier, and the international aspects of it. It's probably the most truthful and revelatory. You should watch, or read Jay's essay on that. And then, Contra's Barry Seal, a couple of things that deal with that just um, well, I don't like to use the S word on here. I know, just because of toss it, just trying to be as careful as we can. Um, and a couple of things that deal with this, that I have right here, actually. One would be, um, a couple of books that deal with this sort of thing that we're going to get into later. One is this is a fun book. It's John H. Davis, and it's about the Gambinos. Um, when did I read this one? I read this one 2017. It's a pretty good book. Mafia Dynasty. Um, Another one is this book right here. This book is excellent. If you're looking for a book dealing with Ricky Prado and Iran Contra and all the stuff that they were just talking about, this one is John Roberts and Evan Wright. It's the guy who wrote uh he wrote the book and it was made into the HBO show Generation Kill. But so who knows about him? But it's got this guy John Roberts who was the guy involved in this, and it's called American Desperado. Really great book. And it talks at length about Ricky Prado, who was one of the allegedly like one of the main characters in this whole Iran Contra thing and the events dealing with three-letter agency organ involvement with that. Another is I've got Reagan's biography up there, Dutch, and then I've showed you guys before. I've got Oliver Stone's a signed copy of Oliver Stone's autobiography up there, and then another one that deals with that in a weird way. And who this is the weird way that culture and um the sort of paramilitary operations and the globalist thing sort of all converge. This is a great example of this. And this is a book called Wonderland Avenue. Wonderland Avenue is a book by Danny Sugarman. Now, Danny Sugarman, Danny Sugarman is the co-author of the book No One Here Gets Out Alive with Jerry Hopkins. That's the biography of Jim Morrison. Danny Sugarman is kind of the real life version of Almost Famous. I hate the movie Almost Famous, but that movie Almost Famous, right, and about Cameron Crowe. Cameron Crowe's a real guy, but Danny Sugarman is like the Uber version of that, because he was a young guy who was kind of a protege of Jim and hung out with him, and then ended up being Pamela Corson's lover, after Jim died. Pamela Corson was Jim Morrison's, I guess, common law wife, and then she died of a heroin overdose 3 years after Jim Morrison. Well, Danny Sugarman also was an addict and all this stuff, but he lived in Wonderland, and this ties in with the kind of loosely ties in with the Wonderland murders that occurred later on, which also is a movie starring Val Kilmer, who had played Jim Morrison. I know I'm going on a wild tangent here. I have a point. The way this converges is that Danny Sugarman, of all people, who wrote Wonderland Avenue and co-wrote the biography of the Doors and was living in Laurel Canyon, was also the husband or boyfriend of Fawn. What's her name? Fawn, not Fawn Leibowitz. Fawn. I forget her last name. Fawn. He was the main witness, one of the main witnesses, who gave testimony in the Iran Contra affair because she was Oliver Stone's secretary. Isn't that wild? That's so crazy. Why would that ever occur? So Oliver Stone, Iran Contra, Jim Morrison, Danny Sugarman, Laurel Canyon, and all this stuff sort of converge in this book. I think that's pretty wild. Um, so, okay. So let's finish up Above the Law. We won't spend as much time on each of these movies, but in the end, so some of the political themes again, we get CIA trafficking opium, Vietnam War, Phoenix program activities, Iran Contra style expose, major intelligence agencies. Nico. Oh, at one point in the movie, Nico implies that that certain group with three letters, merked um Con F. Kennedy and Connert F. Renedy, his brother. And he testifies that agencies manipulate the press, judges, and members of our Congress and are in fact above the law. And again, this has the great line. I've always remembered this line in the movie as when he gets to the guy, he says, "Some people think that they're above the law, but guess what? You aren't." Okay, so next we move on to Hard to Kill. And Hard to Kill is interesting because um let's see, because it's got Kelly LeBrock in it. Kelly LeBrock became Steven Seagal's real life wife. And you remember Kelly LeBrock, if you remember this, Kelly LeBrock was the babe in the 1985 movie Weird Science with Anthony Michael Hall, and Robert Downey Jr.'s in that. Kelly LeBrock was a babe though, and she's in the movie. She's got some pretty spicy lines. So it says Seagal's second film rearranges the politics and action formula of Above the Law to create a little more of a mythic hero's journey type deal about a man almost killed who comes back years later to get his revenge. And in this one, Seagal plays Mason Storm, an ex-LAPD coma victim raised in the Orient who is out to avenge those who killed his wife and tried to kill him and his son. The story opens in 1983 with Storm sneaking around on a dock trying to videotape mobsters as a mysterious, shadowy figure hires them to kill a senator. Picture's first line is, "Come on, guys, I'm missing the Oscars." That would make it April 11th, 1983. He can't make out the face, but he gets it on tape before being found out and having to make a run for it. The shadowy figure turns out to be Assemblyman Vernon Trent, played by William Sadler, later of Die Hard 2, another guy you know is evil as soon as you see his face. It's so true. Who plans to use the senator's death to ascend to office and then maybe run for vice president. Before he can do that, though, he's got to stop this eavesdropper from getting the word out. So this one is pretty funny because there are some real parallels between this and, of all things, The Naked Gun. When did The Naked Gun come out? 1988? 80, it was in the late 80s. And remember, Naked Gun has the same essential plot as this one does at the beginning, but it's all-time 5,000 all-time 5,000-yard rusher, um Heisman Trophy winner, um Orenthal James Simpson, right? Orenthal James Simpson is videotaping these guys, and remember that's the start of The Naked Gun, and that's the same thing that happens in this movie, which came out at basically the same time. Um, and let's see, then we cut to let's see. Luckily, Mason Storm happens to be hard to kill, so he escapes in his car and listens to Chuck Mangione's "Feels So Good" in the tape deck. It's these little bits of character detail that elevate the movie above the level of a Steven Seagal movie where his character doesn't have Chuck Mangione feel so good. I thought that was funny. Storm calls his deathbound partner, Carl Becker, Lou Beatty Jr., to tell him that he recorded the gangsters discussing a hit, then stops for champagne at a liquor store where he is forced to beat four robbers who are armed with a shotgun, a knife, and a baseball bat. And hold on, this character right here. So this guy shows up. Hey man, what's his great line in the movie? He points the shotgun right at his face, and he beats these guys. And then it says, he's just hospitalized some armed robbers, and you're unaware that corrupt cops listened in on the phone call and have been sent to eliminate him. This is the rare Seagal film, by the way, where you get two sex scenes with two different women. It's also the movie that debuted Seagal's iconic ponytail, which must have been impressive at the time, judging by the way his wife lovingly fondles it. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. Seagal and Mrs. Storm, yeah, are in there listening, watching Johnny Carson's monologue. When thugs in ski masks bust in, Storm whips a pistol off of the dresser and busts a guy's wrist, but the thugs kill his wife. For the second movie in a row, he gets to yell, "No!" after a loved one gets shot. They they shoot him, chase his son out a window, and plant cocaine all over the place so they can say he was the dirty cop. And it's pretty. One thing I always notice about this movie is that, um, I like how his son has the wherewithal to, get up and run, jump out the window and run away. He doesn't just sit there and cower because, of course, he is the son of Mason Storm. And then, of course, at the hospital, so Seagal gets shot, and then at the hospital, we meet another buddy cop, internal affairs Lieutenant O'Malley, and this guy is the most O'Malley looking guy you've ever seen, right? He is the most Irish cop you've ever seen, and he calls Storm the cleanest man I ever knew and the most unstoppable son of a bitch I ever knew, and is real upset to hear that Storm is dead. But remember, Mason Storm is hard to kill. So his heart starts up again, and O'Malley convinces the doctors not to tell anyone. As far as the world knows, Mason Storm is a dead, dirty, coke dealing cop, but he's really John Doe hidden away in a coma ward. So then, time goes by, 8 years go by. The movie skips ahead to 7 or 8 years go by. We skip to 1990. Oh, it tells you in the movie 7 years later, 1990. Um, and let's see. The writer here says he was insulted because this is like how at the beginning of Halloween, the movie Halloween starts and then it says October 31st. It's like, yeah, we get it. So he has a Rip Van Winkle beard, and Seagal's real life wife at the time, Kelly LeBrock, has a crush on him. When Storm miraculously wakes up, word spreads, and a dirty cop assassin shows up disguised as a doctor. Um, at one point, the assassin is walking down the hallway and he's looking for Mason Storm, who's woken up, gotten a broom handle, and gotten Kelly LeBrock to take him out of the room. And he's getting away, even though he just woke up from a 7 year coma. And and the assassin runs into like a janitor in the hall, and this makes him so mad that he actually shoots the janitor 2 times in the chest. Can you believe this guy says, "Can you believe this shit?" This guy's just trying to mop the hallway so his family can keep the electricity on. That's the type of assholes we're dealing with here, killers of innocent janitors. So Seagal goes back and Kelly LeBrock takes him home basically, and he says, "When I was a kid, my father was a missionary. I was raised in the Orient. As a young white boy over there, I needed to learn how to fight, as you can imagine." Also, we see yes, this one gets to me. We see, Geraldo's infamous nose-breaking chair fight with the certain type of people on TV, and it says, "What makes this especially great is when he reads the name Geraldo off the screen, Seagal rolls the R to prove he's familiar with Spanish. He says, Geraldo." That is another Seagal motif. He did the same thing with Nicaragua in Above the Law. I remember if you guys haven't seen that, the Geraldo getting his nose broken by the chair, I watched that live. I remember watching it. By the way, I got my own thoughts on Geraldo. I'm gonna keep that to myself. But anyway, I remember seeing Geraldo. Uh, I was at a Firestone with my parents getting the car fixed, and I had to wait in their little lobby, which is not really a lobby, and I could still smell the tires and see the white linoleum floor, and there was a little TV there, and it was after school, and I had to wait for the car to get fixed, and, they were like, "You can turn on the TV," so I turned on the TV, and I remember it was Geraldo, and I never seen this guy before, and the first thing I saw was, this, fan of Hotler standing up and breaking a chair over Geraldo's nose, and I remember that I remember that vividly. I remember thinking, "Yeah, that Geraldo, son of a bitch." Anyway, so, um, so he gets cleaned up, and he starts doing, acupuncture on himself, getting his mind and body right, so that he can get revenge, and then O'Malley shows up, and O'Malley gives him his gun, and, Seagal gives a great speech here. He says, this is inspirational. He says, "No, no, no, you did the right thing. That wasn't the time. Now's the time. We're outgunned and undermanned, but you know something? We're gonna win, and I'll tell you why. Superior attitude, superior state of mind. We'll get them, buddy. Believe me, every fucking one of them." He says. Then he unloads his gun on an innocent woodpile. Then is fuck, guys. So This is the setup for for the best one-liner of all time because he sees a television and he hears a voice and it's the senator, and the senator says, "I'm going to take you to the bank," right? Or you can take that to the bank, and that's going to be the lead up to the climax where he's going to he's going to tell the senator, "I'm going to take you to the bank, to the blood bank." Um, we get some flashbacks, like in Above the Law. We see that Seagal is not a loner. Where he's actually a loner, but he has a family. He's shown to be Christian. He's saying the Lord's Prayer with his son. Although later we know that he knows his way around a Buddhist shrine. Um, and let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. This is with the horse. So it says the action is at times more sadistic and brutal than you expect, like in the liquor store scene where Seagal twists a young punk's foot in ways it clearly was not designed to be twisted, or when he stabs through a guy's neck with a broken pool stick. There are also plenty of those little Seagalian touches that literally no other action star would include in their movies, the best being the majestic scoring as a beautiful white horse escapes to freedom through a fence damaged in a thrilling Jeep chase. Would Jean Claude Van Damme stop to marvel at the beauty of a horse escaping the captivity of man? Would Bruce Willis? No. And this is an odd scene in the film because after they shoot these people in a home invasion and they're getting out, and then there's the chase with the Jeep, there's the music suddenly changes, doo-doo-doo, and it changes, and we see this white horse galloping away to freedom. But it's like, it's really odd because it's like a 2 or 3 second sustained shot on this horse. And obviously, that is supposed to be a symbol of, um, supposed to be a symbol of Geraldo, of Steven Seagal's um, spirit going free so that he can chase after the bad guys, and that there's still some, he has this sensitive, innocent side to him, but also that, it's the white horse and he's not riding the white horse, but I guess it's the white horse, and that, on him, the rider is death because he's going to be death personified going after these guys. We also learned that he was, in this movie, he was in the Army Special Services for 2 years. Oh no, the director of this movie was Bruce Malmuth, who was in Army Special Services for 2 years and was an actor, writer, director working at 26 USO training and recruiting films. So he was doing psyops. Um, there's also a really spicy line that Kelly LeBrock. I don't know even know if I can read this one, but he's taking care of Storm in the hospital, and she's like perving on him, right? Because he's got this Rip Van Winkle beard, and she's like, "Oh, I'm looking after this guy," and then she like, she checks him out, and she has a really spicy line in this movie, which is odd because it's kind of it's like an opposite version of what happens in Kill Bill. My name's Book, that guy, who by the way looked like he would be in a Seagal movie. There's one little scene that I really don't understand. It's page 26 of this book. Happens right after a car chase. There's a shot of a delivery man crossing the street to his truck, and a looped voice yells, "Hey, Ernie, you forgot my buttermilk." It's so weird. As far as I can tell, the failure to deliver buttermilk was not caused by the car chase, so I can't figure out why they included this detail. And is there really such thing as a milkman anymore? Well, back then there wasn't, but I was that's weird about the milkman. I thought it was odd when I was at school in Northern Ireland when I lived there that, there was still a milkman. I don't know, Crispy will have to tell us about that. Is there still a milkman now? Because at the time, they were still delivering milk, bottles of milk in the morning. But, like, in Chicago and LA in, like, the early '90s, was there a milkman? No. "You forgot my buttermilk." Let's see, melting glaciers and uninspiring speeches aside, Hard to Kill is less explicitly political than Above the Law. There's no mention of wars or the CIA, and although there are two senators involved, there's not much talk of actual politics. There is one headline about the SALT II treaty, which maybe implies more sinister military industrial complex shenanigans if Trent were to become president, but that's only if you use the pause button and jump to conclusions. Uh, Trent's no Trent's no new taxes line is arguably an attempt to draw a parallel with ex CIA President Bush. and his infamous "Read my lips, no new taxes." Y'all remember that? But since the real Bush is shown on the TV, you can't really think of Trent as a Bush substitute. That makes sense. Like, so he's not supposed to be a stand-in for Bush, like, or a, he not. It's not supposed to be an allegory for the Bush regime because Bush is shown on the television. So we're in a world where there really is George Bush. Also, George Bush is in the movie Under Siege, which is odd because I thought that was odd when it came out when I saw it, like that he's actually in the movie, and it looks like. Well, we'll get to Under Siege, I guess. This talks about I probably can't mention this, but it talks about weird things with elections. But it says by sabotaging a senator's plane plays off common suspicions and has creepy parallels to incidents before and after the creation of this movie. I can read this because it's straight from the book here on page 27. In 1976, rising Democratic Party star Jerry Lon Litton was killed in a plane crash the same day he received his party's nomination for Senate. And in 1978, Republican candidate for Senate Richard D. Obenshain died in a plane crash while campaigning. In 2000, Missouri Governor Mel Carnahan died in a plane crash while running for Senate against John Ashcroft and still won. And in 2002, Democratic Minnesota Senator Paul Wellstone died in a plane crash just 11 days before a crucial election. In the case of Wellstone, especially the timing and circumstances of the crash caused a lot of his supporters to suspect foul play, despite what the official reports concluded. We also have my notes are also obviously we can't forget to mention Howard Hunt's wife, and then remember Gary Caradori, who also died in a plane crash. And I'm sure it was exactly like they said. And that's all we can say about that. Um, let's see. But that deals with the plot and the senator and his way around the power structure. Um, let's see. This talks about the only real weakness this guy, the author of this book, can find in this argument about nonviolence and Gandhi. He says is getting walked all over. I'm sure it made him feel better to say stuff like "That's for my wife, fuck you and die," which is the great. That's a great line in this movie. But he says, okay, I'll move on from that. He says a lot of credit for the movie has to go to the screenwriters for coming up with such a perfect vehicle for Seagal. The script is credited to Stephen McKay from Darkman 2: The Return of Durant, who wrote the original draft. Darkman 1, by the way, is a great movie. It's underrated. Darkman 1 is I like that movie because it came out. I was talking to Kotel last night about knowing about movies and reading about movies, and one of the things I used to read, I used to go to like I'd be at the swimming pool, and then I would leave with my friends. We'd go to 7-Eleven and we get like a Slurpee or whatever. But I would always get I would always buy music and movie magazines when I was there, to take home, and I would always read Circus Magazine by Bob Guccione, Rolling Stone, Spin, and then there was this brief movie magazine that came out in the early '90s. It was only around for a short period of time, but it was great because, like, it had high gloss pictures in it, of upcoming films, and I still remember um, reading about Bat 21, Flight of the Intruder, and Darkman. And I think Darkman came out in 1990, so I would have been 9 or 10. And Darkman is cool because it really precedes, I mean, look, book movies are what they are now. We know that. But this is 1990. And this is right after Batman came out with Michael Keaton, which is cool. Like, we're talking about, I'm a 9 or 10-year-old. And Darkman was cool because, like, it's like the sheen on the movie is incredible. It almost looks like a comic book. I was obsessed with the Punisher at the time. I collected Punisher comic books when I was like 9. And so I would also buy Punisher comic books. And then I remember watching this movie because I liked the idea that like the dude was like covered in like these bandages and like he had this like dark costume on. And then it was Liam Neeson played Darkman. And the bad guy, all I remember is that the bad guy in the movie is the same guy who was in that movie, what's it called? Doctor Giggles. You guys have heard that movie, Doctor Giggles? That's the bad guy. Okay, so anyway, the guy who wrote Darkman 2 is the guy who wrote the script for this. Um, says, let's see. There are a few nice touches in the script that didn't make it to the screen. Um, During the love scene with his wife, Storm throws a pillow to knock the door shut, which would have been pretty smooth. In one fight, Storm knocks the guy's tooth out, puts it in the guy's hand, and makes a vague reference to the tooth fairy. And there's a part where Sonny gets to say one of my favorite phrases, "Fuck you, Jack." Um, and let's see. There is oh, the way that these scripts describe things is interesting. In the Coma Ward, it's described the way the scene is set up is described as a spectral haunting scene full of pathos. The shot after the classic blood bank line is called Storm's Vengeance Look. And Vernon Trent is called Shadow Man during his first appearance when his identity is obscured. Which is interesting because later on we have the movie Glimmer Man, right? Um, we have bullets hitting symbolic objects throughout the film. And at the end, we have the death scene where, um, let's see, Trent tries to stab him with a fireplace poker. Seagal does a shihonage move, flipping the bastard headfirst into the fireplace. His neck is impaled on the fireplace's decorative grill. And as he struggles to escape, his hair catches on fire. Oh my gosh. Okay. So now we're on to our third movie here. How we doing here? How we doing, guys? I'm gonna kind of roll through Executive Decision and Under Siege. Um, but I'm gonna spend the most time probably on Out for Justice because I think it's the best Seagal movie. Uh, and right now we're on to Marked for Death. Marked for Death is interesting because um, it it's completely different from all the other ones because we get a totally different bad guy. We get the Yardies, and basically what happens is Seagal is forced to confront these people who have marked him for death because he has somehow encroached on their territory. He's with his friend Keith David, who's great in this movie. Um, his friend Max, and Keith David is a great partner in this because obviously Keith David is great, right from They Live, the longest fight scene of all time, but he's great in this because the movie also fits Jimmy Cliff into the movie. Jimmy Cliff, the great Jimmy Cliff, the reggae singer, is in the movie. Um, and let's see, he Seagal attends a high school football practice to say hello to the coach, an old friend, of course, named Max, Keith David. Max happens to notice some Jamaican gangsters in Letterman jackets sharing crack with the kids on the bleachers. He gets real mad, but Hatcher tells him to leave it alone, man. Leave it alone, which we know with Seagal movies means that he's not going to leave it alone, right? Um, One thing Hatch and Max don't know is that right there in the suburbs, a Jamaican crack kingpin named Screwfist is fighting over territory, the high school, the book says, with a Colombian Noriega lookalike named Tito Barco. Tito Barco is legit because he is in Scarface and Carlito's Way. Um, a chicken gets beheaded and everything. Let's see. They use voodoo curses on each other. There's a magic battle. The magic battle is actually started by Tito when he goes to the sorceress with the most frightening power for help. She tells him that Screwface is Abakwa, the leopard people, which is a reference to Afro-Cuban secret societies that have been around since the 19th century. He says that he is muy malo because he is also mujadero. Since Tito speaks Spanish, he ought to know that she's calling Screwface a silly person or a fool, but instead he acts scared. She takes a sexy bath, spits out some Bacardi, and cuts a chicken's head off in front of a photo of Screwface. Um, this is a great movie because remember Jay and Jamie did their voodoo films and voodoo film analyses, and one of the movies covered in that is Live and Let Die. We recently read that some of the Bond films are being unpersoned, right? Because of insensitivity. But Marked for Death is probably one of the best voodoo films, along with Angel Heart. I mean, we covered. Remember, we covered Angel Heart. Go back to my Angel Heart analysis. Shouts out to Jethro there. Shouts out to Jethro there in the chat. Big up. But this movie is like we get the full on Santeria and voodoo rituals. We get the Bacardi, we get the blowing the smoke backwards, the cutting the chicken head off, the demonic rituals, and Bakua. And we get the Gemini twins. So this movie's great because we get the split personality literally personified in the dual bad guy in one character. They have marked Steven Seagal for death, and a guy says, "Me no know you now, but I promise you, you're a dead man walking. Run down Babylon." Um, when Screwface's thugs drive by and shoot the fuck out of the house, hitting his niece, "They hurt my baby," somebody says. There's a moment. There's a moment in this where the writer says, it's called The Look, and it happens between Robert Forster and Fred Williamson in Vigilante. It also happens between William Devane and Tommy Lee Jones in Rolling Thunder. Rolling Thunder is a great movie. Rolling Thunder is Quentin Tarantino's favorite movie. It's the movie where William Devane is a Green Beret Phoenix program guy who comes back to Texas, where the Dixie Mafia comes home, sticks his hand in the garbage disposal. It gets replaced by a hook hand, and he goes on a killing spree along with some hoe that he meets in Texas. Goes down, kills all the bad guys, and he meets up with his partner Tommy Lee Jones, and they just want to eliminate everybody. It's a great movie. Um, and that occurs between Keith David and Steven Seagal, where they don't need to say anything. They just know that they are going to be out for vengeance because he's been marked for death. Screwface is a memorable villain because of his spooky contacts and his crazy dialogue, like "Everybody want heaven, nobody want dead. Fred, stop the blood clot crying," he says. "Stop the blood clot crying, everybody dying." You ever heard that song, um, Red Rum? There's a song there's a song that sort of samples this, and it's by this guy Nine. He was a rapper in the 90s. He was, like, friends with Craig Mack, and it's called Red Rum. "Everybody want heaven. Everybody want heaven, nobody gonna get there. Stop the blood clot crying, everybody dying." Sorry, I know it's a terrible accent, but that's Screwface. He's a great villain. Um, let's see. There's a nice touch when they go to buy weapons. Hatcher asks the dealer if he's still sober and tells him to stay off the Nembutol, stay off the Yellow Jackets. Um, the gang interprets magic power. Of course, Screwface. Oh, because Screwface gets decapitated. There's some great scenes in this movie. Screwface gets decapitated after they go to Jamaica to pursue the Yardies. They see Jimmy Cliff playing in a bar, um, and one of the other cops holds up Screwface's decapitated head. Of course, think this is magic power, but Screwface is actually twin brothers pretending to be one guy. So Hatcher fights Screwface to the death again, so we get a double death, right? Gemini twins, and we can all be thankful for the second chance because it is unquestionably, here you go, one of the best climaxes in all of Steven Seagal's films. It would have been cool if he literally bit the guy's head off. But what he chose to do instead is even better. Hatch grabs Screwface number two by the skull, pokes out his eyeballs with his thumbs, rams him all the way through a cement wall, cracks his spine over his knee, and throws him down an elevator shaft where he is impaled on a conveniently placed metal protrusion type deal. That's four deaths just for this one twin. Then Hatch looks down at the body and quips, "I hope they weren't triplets." But do you get why? Do you get why he is impaled upside down? Because he's thrown into hell, right? He's thrown downwards and he is impaled upside down to show that his power, this guy was inverted, his demonic power. He is now upside down. He's been decapitated and inverted, and now his magic power and his weird Santeria spell over these people has been broken. Um, and this is also interesting because it started the whole trend of Yardies in movies. And the a month and a half later, um, Predator 2 was released, which is has the same type of deal in it. Predator 2 has one of the most I mean, I don't like the movie Predator 2, but it does have one of the most interesting, like, introductions in any film. Like, that raid scene on the Yardies is, like, it's wild. It's really wi it's incredible. Guy pours out a gigantic pile of Chocha on a table and then smashes his face into it, and he's like, "Everything," and then he gets attacked by uh, the DARPA body mod alien, along with the cops. Okay, so yeah, so in all, Mark for Death has the shattered psyche, the Gemini twins, unified into one, and the Yardies. So it's a pretty interesting film. And also, yeah, New Jack Kerouac City. Yeah, New Jack City also has this as an element. New Jack City is a great movie. That's a great movie, classic. Um, and so now we get to chapter 4. Before I get to chapter 4, everybody, thank you for being here with me. If you want to smash that like, um, thanks for hanging out with me and doing this just fun Steven Seagal breakdown. And again, we're using this book, Seagalology, um, a study in the films of Steven Seagal by Verne. And a lot of filmmakers love this guy in his reviews, and his analyses of these films. So it's just fun. And again, coming up later this week, we got a whole bunch of stuff coming up, which I've already mentioned. If you want to smash that like, I sure would appreciate it. I sure would appreciate you hitting that sub button. We got a $5 PayPal donation from Jason. Thank you so much, Jason. Shouts out to you. We also had another PayPal donation from Jason earlier. Um, and let's see, we had a 3.99 dono chat donation from Amptown. So shouts out to Amptown out there. Amptown 1, we love you. Thank you for supporting me so much. Really appreciate you. Um, let's see. Also, let me look at the see if we got any other super chats. We got Nico who donated 20 bucks already in this stream. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you, Nico. Nico Toscani. Um, see if any other super chats came in. I might as well read these right now. Oh yeah, we had Herman's $10 donation about the Mark for Death elevator scene. We had Charisma Mysterian's $5 donation about Chuck Norris. Tim's $20 donation about judo. So thank you so much for those. Really appreciate you. If you want to support me, please hit any of the links. Really appreciate y'all. Um, keep sharing the streams. I mean, maybe you're listening to this while you're working or you're driving or you're chilling or you're going to sleep, or whatever you might happen to do. And whatever it is, I sure appreciate you being here with me. We're almost at 1830 subs and we're trying to get up to 2K. So we'll get there eventually. And also, we're going to get up to eventually, hopefully, we're at like 80,000 views right now. We've been going about a year. We're doing pretty well here, y'all. So when we get to 100,000 views, maybe we'll have some other kind of party and that'll be fun. So I appreciate y'all. Thank you so much for being here. And let's get to what I think is probably the best Steven Seagal film, and that is Out for Justice. Okay, this one's different. Let me just give a breakdown of what this film's about without going through the text here so specifically. So Out for Justice is interesting because um it's the one film that is driven by pure revenge, because in Hard to Kill, we had a character whose family was murdered, and he has to go after this corrupt senator, and he has to survive the coma and all that. But in this one, it's totally different. In Out for Justice, we get Seagal is sort of, I guess he's half Sicilian, or he is Sicilian, and he is like half cop, half mafia, kind of like an Above the Law. But everybody wants this one character dead, and the character is Richie. Anybody seen Richie? Because Steven Seagal has a partner named Bobby Lupo, and they are on a stakeout. They sort of crash the stakeout because Seagal sees a pimp beating up a pregnant woman on the street, And he's like, don't do it, don't do it. And he gets out and he has to, they all swarm and he beats up the guy and throws him through a car windshield. And then later on, we see this bad guy who is played by William Forsythe, who is excellent. He's such a good bad guy in this movie. He's total scum. And we see that he is with his crew. He opens up a safe in the floor. He says, "Take a look." They look down, and basically they see piles of cash and drugs. And he says, "Anybody who survives the night, this is yours," which implies that this guy intends to get totally cracked out, wreak mayhem on the streets, and not survive. And so the movie is basically one night. It's like long day's journey into night, right? Or journey to the end of the night, cop style mixed with the mafia, because Richie is a mafia associate, and what he does is in broad daylight, he drives up into Hell's Kitchen and he shoots Richie, who is Steven Seagal's partner. His family has just gone inside the grocery store, but he kills him on the street, gets back in the car, and leaves. Then when he's driving away, the car pulls over and like this woman in a station wagon's like, "Hey, can you guys move out of the way?" And he walks up and he blows the woman's brains out in the car. So basically the guy is a complete maniac. Then he gets in the car, they stop in traffic and he's just smoking crack like right there in the street. Um the mafia wants this guy gone because he's wreaking havoc, he's causing too much trouble, too much heat. Um, they don't mind if Steven Seagal goes after him, even though they say, "We have our own ways. Why don't you let us handle it?" And Seagal is like, he's like, I'm gonna take care of this guy. And they're like, "Yeah, we know." And they're like, "Bene." So everybody's looking for this guy. William Forsythe then goes and uh he basically goes on a killing spree and he cannot catch this guy until he finally does. But that's the movie. It's just Steven Seagal out for justice as a cop who doesn't care about the fuck the law, right? Esoteric Detective Eric, fuck the law. And he doesn't care about the law. But there is an interview with Steven Seagal where he does talk about how he doesn't care about the law. Like it's a real interview. Huh, but I don't know what the context of that was. Um, but he's trying to find the bad guy to eliminate him. The mafia is trying to eliminate him, and the bad guy is just trying to do all that he can before he dies overnight. Um, he kills this poor guy in a wheelchair. He shoots him out of the wheelchair. He's just killing everyone. So this says, even among the classic films of Seagal's golden era, Out for Justice is a standout. It's a serious, gritty crime drama with better production values and classier direction than the previous three. Thanks to director John Flynn, who did the great Vietnam vet revenge movie, Rolling Thunder. So John Flynn directed Rolling Thunder. We just talked about Rolling Thunder. That's the one with William Devane and Tommy Lee Jones. Tommy Lee Jones will then later appear in Andrew Davis's Under Siege, and then he will win an Oscar for Andrew Davis's movie with Harrison Ford. This says um, the script by David Henry Lee has a few of the usual Steven Seagal motifs, but doesn't follow the expected formula at all. There is no opening flashback in another country, no military or CIA backstory, no explanation or mention of his interest in Asian culture. He doesn't find any corruption in the police force or the government. He doesn't get framed. He doesn't have to stop anybody from doing anything. He just wants to kill one particular guy. And the entire movie takes place over one day in one neighborhood in Brooklyn as he tracks the guy. Now, the movie also has um, an epigraph, and the epigraph is by Arthur Miller, who talks about how his neighborhood in Brooklyn was the world, and it's interesting because it's kind of a microcosm of the world, the early '90s, and urban hellscape. But but we've covered Arthur Miller, right? We did The Crucible with our homegirl Rachel, and they have a channel called The Crucible, but it was the Arthur Miller play, The Crucible, early on in the channel. Um, let's see. Says, oh, Seagal is decked out with a low cut vest with no shirt underneath, which he sometimes tops off with a beret. However, the beret does give an indication of a kind of a military background. I mean, he's wearing a green beret. He's not wearing a green beret. He's wearing a black beret, but with the special forces badge on it. Um, while he's got his no shirt low cut waistcoat with his gold chain cross. Um, let's see. It says Seagal plays NYPD narcotics detective Gino Felino. He's staking out some warehouse or something with with his partner Bobby Lupo, who he says has been acting funny lately. Waiting for the right moment for their $3 million bust, Gino gets distracted by a pimp beating up a pregnant hooker. He can't just stand idly by while that happens, so he moves in early, breaking up the beating but blowing the bust. The pimp apparently knows him and threatens to F your wife and kill your before Gino grabs him by the neck, smashes his head through the passenger side window of a car, then swings him by his tie into some garbage cans. The pimp yells, Gino, you son of a bitch, and makes a run at him, but Gino flips the bastard head first through the windshield. There's a shot from inside the car through the broken window as Gino steps into the shot. Freeze frame and bang, it says Steven Seagal in giant letters, filling the whole screen. And then a clank as out for justice appears on the screen. It's stamped onto the screen. Truly, without a doubt, the best opening title sequence Seagal has ever had. Next, we meet our villain, the weaselly mustached wannabe wise guy Richie Madano, played by William Forsythe, who was in Once Upon a Time in America and Stone Cold. He locks up a whole bunch of money in a vault and tells his buddies that if they stick with him until the end of the night, it's all theirs. But we know that what that means is that this guy has absolutely no um he knows he's gonna cause as much mayhem as he can in one night. He's totally cracked out. He pulls up, he pulls out a crack pipe and starts smoking it, and flips out on a random lady who yells at him for blocking traffic. He walks over and shoots her point blank in the head. Richie is an insane crackhead, and he's really not planning to make it through the night. That's the movie. Usually, a villain in a movie is expected to have some kind of plan, some kind of ultimate goal. That's not the case with Richie. He kills his girlfriend and Bobby Lupo before the story really begins, and that's all he really had planned. After that, he just wants to smoke crack and have a party with some hookers, maybe kill a few people if it comes up. He wants to have a fun time until he dies. So, this is a great movie because the bad guy is so bad because he is total chaos. He has no plan other than, make it through the night if you can, right? He's got no ultimate agenda, really. He just wants to have a good time, and his version of good time is crack smoking, killing people, killing innocent bystanders, killing his girlfriend, shooting a guy in a wheelchair, and, just getting fucked up, I guess. And he's really good at being bad, um, because he's unpredictable. Let's see. This says, oh, Jerry Orbach shows up in the movie. Um, he's the police captain. Of course, he's the old police captain. He plays basically the Donald Sutherland role in the movie Fallen that we just covered. Jerry Orbach's great because remember he was in Law and Order. He's also the dad in Dirty Dancing. But when you see him, you automatically think Law and Order, which is interesting because Law and Order is what Steven Seagal is trying to maintain in this movie through his own sense of hardcore street justice. This is the only Seagal movie where he goes to visit the parents of the villain and tells them he's going to kill their son. And he's an honorable guy. So he later apologizes to the dad for the way I behaved in your home. A very good Seagal moment. You always got to get some honor in there if you can. Out for Justice, this is page 44 of this book. Out for Justice is one of the Seagal pictures where the director has left the biggest imprint on the movie. From the very beginning, it feels very different from the previous three Seagal pictures. It feels darker and more serious. The use of handheld cameras, musical montage, Jerry Orbach, music's by David Michael Frank, but the style is completely different, more of a bombastic orchestral sounding score that heightens the drama of the situations with its low foreboding tone. Even the opening credits are gray, which seems appropriate for the movie because Seagal's character blurs the line between good guy and bad guy. The good we in fact, all the good guys and bad guys. We don't know really who's the good guy and the bad guy other than the badge that they wear. for the cops or the suits that they wear for the bad guys. But even the bad guys are the good guys because they're trying to get rid of this ultra bad guy, and they have their own sense of street code and honor. That's fine. Um, Also, one interesting thing is that Marked for Death has the personified Gemini twins, and the bad guys in two that are, it's two guys who are put into one character so that it introduces an element of chaos and magic and mystery and this sort of, whatever weird voodoo's, Santeria that they're doing amongst their followers and their victims. And then we find out that Screwface is actually two guys, right? It's just the name for two brothers. But this one's interesting because if you're to look into the movie and really sort of try and analyze the symbolism of the characterization in the film, you can see that Seagal's character in this and the bad guy, Richie, are essentially the same. They're both, they're both psycho. They both are connected to the mob. They're both sort of affiliated with some sort of justice, and they both are willing to do anything. It's just that they differ when it comes to Seagal has a code, and but in the same way that Seagal has a code and is like for his own sense of order, William Forsythe, Richie, has is total chaos and has no code. So in a way, they are like, dialectical opposites. But in other ways, the dialectical, it's like dialectical materialism, turning around and meeting on the same side on the other end. The two characters are the same and unified in a number of ways. They know each other. Another thing about Seagal movies that's interesting is he's always the world in which the movies take place is always one where every character knows about him. Right? Or they either know him personally or even the people on the street. Like, remember the pimp? The pimp, Gino, the pimp knows Gino. He knows Seagal. They all know him. So that allows us to have an insight into the world in the movie, like it's an easy access into the movie because we as viewers feel like we know the character. And we know we know where it's going. We don't have any fear that like he's gonna lose, but that's part of the fun of the movie. Um, this says let's see. Yeah, they're both ultra violent. Every fight scene in this movie is a classic. Um, Remember he gets chased and then he goes into this is also the one where he's running. It's the famous, Seagal running scene. But he chases Richie into a I guess a connected, sausage shop, and they take out a big sausage and he lumps he lops the guy over the head with it, which is kind of degrading to the guy, right? Um Toledo says, Sabrina, my husband and I are watching Sharp, and I'm in between watching BLA and 1810's Scene Bean fighting the French. Excellent. Thank you, Toledo. Appreciate you. Appreciate you out there. Love you. Um, in the movie, he causes a lot of pain. One guy he knocks out with a pool ball wrapped in a bar towel, causing him to yell, "Motherfucker, you knocked my teeth out." You remember that guy? That guy is a total PWT scumbag with a skunk wig, and he wants to he wants to fight Seagal in the bar. This is the iconic scene where Seagal walks into the bar. Hey, anybody seen Richie? Anybody know why Richie did Bobby Lupo? Hey, fuck you, the guy says, and Seagal would say, "Oh, me, right?" And then he always, whenever he gets pointed, at, a finger in the chest, he always breaks the guy's wrist. You also see that he's kind of not so surreptitiously wrapping a a pool ball in a bar towel that he's going to use to knock Skunk Wig's teeth out later on. He shoves the guy into a random like phone booth in the bar twice. There's also the guy, hey, this guy's fucking nothing without his badge and his gun. This guy's nothing. Then he walks behind the bar. He smashes everything on the bar, throws all the glasses down, and he says, "Hey, I see a lot of trophies over here." some Golden Gloves over here, a lot of things over here. Who's the slugger, huh? Is that you?" And the guy says, "Yeah, yeah, I'm the slugger." And he says, "Oh yeah, why don't you take your best shot?" "Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good." And then this poor old fella telegraphs this punch, tries to punch Seagal, who just barely moves aside and breaks the guy's face on the bar. Um, and there's the mafia guy sitting in the chair. I think that this movie had a number of sketchy people connected with it. In fact, um, this is part of where the thing about him taking the loan for the movie comes up, and we see, this happened with Godfather and Godfather 2, and we know that this is a thing because they get their financing for movies, and these people are all sort of connected in the same world. But I think one of the things is I've read that you can tell who is actually someone in real life in the movie because they are people who are not involved in the fight. They don't get hit in the movie. The people who do are all actors. Of course, it's also got um, the movie has this guy Styx, who's one of the great characters in movies. He's the guy who has the pool cue and he fights, and the pool cue breaks in two, and he fights Seagal. That guy was one of Bruce Lee's like three lieutenants, one of the only guys that he trained to fight Jeet Kune Do or whatever. So he was some sort of martial arts master. That Styx. We also have the thing with him um rescuing the puppy, which is a weird scene in the movie. But he does say when he rescues the puppy, the guy throws the puppy out a window in the car, and Seagal rescues the dog. And then Seagal said he prays. He says, "Please, Lord, let me run into this guy sometime. Please." And the Lord answers his prayer, and he literally does run into the guy at the end of the film, which is great. Um, Juliana Margulies makes her debut as Rika, Richie's ex-junkie, sometimes girlfriend in this movie. The movie also has, um, Greg Allman does the end credit scene. It's also got Raymond Cruz. Raymond Cruz plays one of the associates, and he later will appear in Under Siege. Raymond Cruz you will recognize because he plays what's the guy's name in Breaking Bad? Tuco. And he is the guy who is like, if you're gonna get a guy who is a SEAL or a sniper in a movie, this is the guy. He was in Training Day, but probably his best role is in Clear and Present Danger. Remember, he's the one guy who survives the sniper, the when they turn on the snipers and the paramilitary team that is led by Willem Dafoe. Clear and present. We're gonna have a clear and present danger. That's the movie title, right? Yeah, that's right, Jeff. That's what he says in Training Day. You're gonna do the old Washington two-step. I don't dance, Mr. President. Remember? That's not right, Mr. President. I don't dance. It says, let's see. Various types of mafia are a motif throughout much of Steven Seagal's film oeuvre. In Above the Law, he's related by blood to Sicilian mafioso. In Marked for Death, he faces the Jamaican mafia, the Yardis. In Into the Sun, his later film, he fights the Yakuza. Out for Justice is the one that has the Italian mafia most organically worked into the story. His respect for certain gangsters and his disdain for others are presented very matter of factly. It's not clear whether or not the audience is supposed to be uncomfortable that a cop is taking meetings with the mafia. Gino follows his own sense of honor instead of the actual laws he's supposed to be enforcing because he's going after this crazy crackhead. Um, okay, here's where we get the thing about the mafia. It says one of his associates in there was an intern on the early Seagal films is this guy Greg Nasso. Nasso himself claims to have been involved in the foreign distribution of Above the Law using his connections in the big 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 farm industry. At any rate, his first producer credit was on Mark for Death. According to a pretty cruel profile in Vanity Fair, Seagal liked Nasso because of his Italian tough guy persona and its colorful connections, but Seagal himself probably wouldn't agree with that statement. When Spy magazine wrote that Nasso's alleged mafia connections wrote about his mafia connections, Seagal filed a defamation lawsuit, denying, among other things, the implication that he would associate with criminals. Whether Seagal knew it at the time or not, Nassau really did have a connection to members of the Gambino crime family, it says. This book says. Um, in December 2000, Nassau, his brother Vincent, and members of that family tracked down Seagal to Toronto, where they allegedly threatened him, demanding he pay 150 grand for each movie that he makes. They tried to shake him down again the next month in Brooklyn. At the end of 2002, Seagal became a witness in two racketeering trials in Brooklyn federal court. One against Peter Gotti and six others, the other against the Nassau brothers. Dangerous business, the film industry, isn't it? Um, they tried to embarrass him, claiming he led a bizarre lifestyle and leaking stories about an ex-CIA operative who was supposedly going to testify against his character. But Seagal was quickly vindicated when recordings of the conversations between Nassau and alleged members of the Gambinos were presented at the trial. Um, Later on, I guess they settled again, and that's kind of the end of that. But it just shows you that the film industry and Seagal himself the both were mixed up with elements that the films at times are supposed to be moralizing against, but in this film, they sort of organically make their way into the fact that both are working um, to take out somebody that even the crime families find repugnant. So they have a kind of shared street code. But this will appear over and over in terms of Seagal's legacy in his films. And so let's see. But that's about it. I mean, the Out for Justice is his best film. I mean, it's really well done. Like this analysis says, like it's gritty. Um, it has the kind of pretentious epigraph at the beginning of the film from Arthur Miller, but it does set the scene for as an epigraph should for what the film is going to do. And I think it's so great because the character, the villain, is so chaotic. And one thing about Seagal movies, we always get these kind of memorable villains. Because what would an action movie be without a memorable villain? Um, we're going to see that like Under Siege again is the end result of or kind of the follow-up to Die Hard and the way that the Alan Rickman character that Hans Gruber is given a major role in the movie as a kind of a foil, right, against John McClane. But yes, we've done Mark for Death. Screwface Babylon. So now we're gonna talk about and this goes into the next era of Seagal, and this is starting to be the kind of beginning of the end in a way of the great Seagal movies because Under Siege is the most commercial of his films, and not only the most commercial, but obviously takes the largest, role in terms of partnership with, MIC. I mean, the USS Missouri is the setting for the film. So what Under Siege is about is we have we're set up with the fact that the USS Missouri, which is a dreadnought is it's coming towards Pearl Harbor and it's going towards its decommissioning. Um, USS Missouri was a famous dreadnought because it was the one that was created in response to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, as it says in the film. And then later, remember, the Japanese signed. They gave up and signed the documents on board the USS Missouri. By the way, I never knew that it was what's the guy's name? Oh, what is the guy's name? Who's the who's the Englishman who is the uncle of William and he was assassinated by the IRA in the 80s. What is the guy's name? And it's in Louis' name. He's the one who signed, their surrender on board the USS Missouri. What's the guy's name? Why can't I remember this guy's name? Somebody give me his name. The guy who signed the surrender and was assassinated by the IRA. Um, Louis. Mountbatten. It was Mountbatten. Oh my gosh, couldn't get that one. Mountbatten was on board the ship, but anyway, that's sort of irrelevant here. The ship is going, and the captain is going to have his birthday party. The XO is played by Gary Busey, and Gary Busey is basically like, "Look, Captain, why do you put up with that man? Why do you put up with that crash?" And the captain is this old fella, and he's like, "Look, there's a lot you don't know about Ryback. He's done a lot." Ryback is walking around. Thank you, Lord Mountbatten. Yeah, Ryback is walking around in his he doesn't have his dress whites on. Everybody's got to have their dress whites on because they're going to have this birthday party and this ceremony for the captain. And he is in black. He's the man in black. And he says to the captain, "Look, you know how I feel about ceremonies and all this stuff." And he says, "Look, Captain says, look, if I had your ribbons, I'd wear them to bed." So we know Ryback is not what he seems. He's just a lowly cook, but he's something more, of course, because he's Steven Seagal. He's down there and he says, "Look, Captain." Captain says, "Look, the president is going to be on board here, and I'd like it if you met him." And he says, "Look, you know, I don't want to do all that. And plus, I've got 2,000 pounds of bouillabaisse to make downstairs." So he says, "Fine, just stay out of the way." That's when Gary Busey says, the thing about, "Why do you put up with this fella?" Um, so then we see Ryback down in the galley, and he's making his bouillabaisse. Um, Gary Busey comes down, and they order these guys, "Look, you guys need to get upstairs because we're going to have this ceremony here." We see, by the way, George Bush giving a speech, and we see George Bush and Barbara Bush on screen. Now, it's weird because obviously this was made with heavy partnership from the military. But I always thought this movie was weird because usually I remember when it came out because usually, first of all, presidents and current like politicians like that, especially at the time, were not in the actual movie. They wouldn't even make reference to them. It would be some sort of, other character. But in this one, we actually see Bush and Barbara like on screen in the movie, which is weird because obviously they had to this was in partnership with the film. I just find it very odd. And yes, the ship was going to be decommissioned at the time, and I guess that gives a role for the film. The film also was already a spec script, and it was called Dreadnought, so it wasn't originally a Steven Seagal vehicle. This aggression will not stand, man. And so anyway, what happens is we see we see that they're gonna have this ceremony. They tell them, "You need to be up there." Ryback, Casey Ryback, who Steven Seagal says, I don't do anything without the captain's approval. I'm not going up there." And Gary Busey says, I forget what he says to him, but Ryback pushes him, and they say, "That's assaulting an officer." And he says, "That's not assaulting an officer. That's assaulting an officer." And he punches him. Gary Busey says, "Now I know why they put you down here because you hit like a F slur." And he, instead of putting him in the brig, he throws him in the meat locker, which is entirely against regulation. Then he has some sort of mind controlled little simp, you know, weakling guard him while all the other guys are up there. Shouts out to Elias for that $20 super chat. Appreciate you, Elias. Thank you so much. Um, so the ceremony goes as planned, and we see that there's a helicopter that's going to land, and it's got what's the band's name? Bad Billy and the Bail Jumpers or something, with Tommy Lee Jones sort of faking asleep on the helicopter. Maybe he is asleep. He's got this leather jacket with studs on it. And he's got his Joe Biden, turbo aviator shades on, and a bunch of guys in the band. And he's got his head leaning over on Erica Leniak. Erica Leniak plays the girl who's just an actress, who's been hired to jump out of the birthday cake topless. She was the what does it say, 1988 Playboy Playmate of the Month or whatever. It's weird because she was also in E.T. And E.T. Was one of the films they were watching earlier on in the movie. I think it was in Above the Law, or no, it was in Hard to Kill. They were watching E.T. Say they mentioned E.T. in terms of Oscar nights. But she was in that. Did you know that? Erica Leniak later on went on to be in, Baywatch before Pamela Anderson. But, yeah, so Gary Busey he plays XO Commander Krill, and he says, "Hold on, I gotta go get in costume." And he dresses up like a woman, hides his gun in his wig. He is there to meet Tommy Lee Jones and his band when they land. They go down and they're performing, and they're performing this song or whatever. Tommy Lee Jones then says, "Who is the commanding officer? Who's the highest ranking officer in this room? Please, sir, stand up." Shoots the guy in the head, then they take over. Meanwhile, Gary Busey goes upstairs, pulls his gun out of his wig, and shoots the captain. Um, but Ryback is still in the meat locker. They send some guys down to get him out of the meat locker. He kills them. He gets out. He makes a bomb in a microwave, which is pretty cool. And then Tommy Lee Jones says, "I told you to check all of the personnel files." And Gary Busey, like a dum dum, says, "I thought he was just a cook. Give me two, Utah. Two bricks coming up." Gary Busey's awesome. I love Gary Busey. I mean, he's he's so he's Gary Busey, right? So it kind of doesn't really do any good to describe him and his roles in films. But Pappas in Point Break is one of the great roles of all time because Point Break is probably the greatest movie of all time. But anyway, he says, "Oh well, I checked his personnel files. Turns out this guy is a highly decorated Navy SEAL. He led some operations. Um, he was he was his rank, he lost his security clearance after Panama, they say. So something happened in Panama, and he can only hold the rank of either a cook or a yeoman. He decides to follow the captain. He's with the captain. Captain takes care of him. He even wants him to meet him. And he says, "Sir, I don't think that would be a good idea." Um, and remember that scene when the redheaded guy shows up in the galley and he's like, "Look, Captain Ryback, what you don't understand here." The guy, like, his mouth moves too much for his talking. And then there's a scene where Ryback like makes fun of him. But anyway, what happens is, Erica Leniak has been given some, Lortabs and some, Xannies and some Nembutols from Tommy Lee Jones to cure her motion sickness or whatever. Um, she gets knocked out, but then she wakes up, jumps out of the cake, surprises Ryback. So now he has to take her along. So now he's got his, little innocent love interest, but she ends up, doing pretty well. She helps load the tomahawks later on in the film into the guns. She carries a machine gun. He describes to her the practical elements of the selector switch and a semi-automatic weapon. She seems to take that information on board. She follows him around, and yeah, she's a girly girl at the beginning, but she does pretty well in this. And he ends up meeting up with the rest of his crew, including the guy from Clear and Present Danger, and some other guys. And it turns out that Stranix, Tommy Lee Jones, is hijacking the ship because he led something called Operation Cleopatra for the CIA. And this says on page 61 here, in 2003, real life Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz gave a similar defense of DARPA's controversial plan for a terror futures market where businessmen put money on what targets would be bombed and what leaders would be assassinated. The agency does it is brilliantly imaginative in places where we want them to be imaginative. It sounds like maybe they got too imaginative in this area. Of course, Stranix is more than just imaginative thinker. He's a guerrilla paid to commandeer warships and submarines. After his project Cleopatra is canceled, the CIA attempts to assassinate him and fails, inspiring him to create our current troubles on the USS Missouri. Um, it says the movie points out how crazy that approach is. You've been financing this damn maniac's private army, and it didn't occur to you that it might be a problem, they say. While Stranix is the bad guy, Tom Breaker of the CIA is portrayed broadly as a weasel, a prick, and a scumbag. His program for training everyone in the CIA who's crazy has caused this problem in the first place, but he's willing to just blame it on the cook if things don't work out. And when Stranix jokingly mentions the 60s, Breaker gets bitter. "Look, Bill, if this is about reliving the 60s, you can forget it about it, buddy. The movement is dead." So again, that goes back to the theme that we mentioned earlier on about the 60s and the movement and how these are kind of blowbacks. And again, I mean, Tommy Lee Jones mentions this in the movie. He says he's talking to the CIA weasel who's in the war room,
because when Tommy Lee Jones takes over the when Stranix takes over the Missouri, he hijacks it because they have a bunch of Tomahawk missiles, and Tomahawk missiles we would have known about in terms of the broader call. I mean, I knew about them and I was like 12, and I knew about them because of watching Desert Storm, because everybody at that point knew about Tomahawks and Patriot missiles. Well, it turns out they have like 9 nuclear tipped Tomahawks on board. And the first thing that he does is shoots out the satellite relay stations. He also uses the whatever it is, the Gatling guns to shoot out the 2 F-16s who are sent to check out what's going on aboard the ship. He has a Bill Bates-esque soy computer nerd who hacks into the mainframe and gets the launch codes. Do you have the launch codes? He gets the launch codes, and when they meet with the war room guys and the Joint Chiefs back at the Pentagon, who are wondering what's happened to the ship, they get the call on the intercom or whatever from Tommy Lee Jones, and he gives this weird speech about he says topsoil, STDs, overpopulation, governments will fall, anarchy will reign. And his crew looks at him like, okay, you're playing a role and you're crazy here. But it just goes to show you that his character, he says, the revolution is not over, because that's what a revolution does. It a movement will stop and will go until it stops. A revolution will cycle back to where it started, hence the term revolution. It revolves. And so he says now in his own timeline, he was working for DARPA and CIA, and he was funding private armies and doing all their shenanigans. They turned on him, tried to eliminate him from his Operation Cleopatra. Now he is taking over a warship, taking over nuclear weapons, and he's going to sell them to the highest bidder and make a ton of money. And it's only up to Ryback, the Navy SEAL that they didn't know they had on board, who happens to be acquainted with all this stuff, to take him out. It's a pretty good plot. Right? It's really, I mean, it's pretty good. Um, of course, they also have the return to the Hendrix Boomer Garcia music, because when he takes over the ship, we hear Voodoo Child playing the first notes of it, and then we get the Welcome to the Revolution singing, which is like showing you that you know all of these 50s and 60s shenanigans will have their blowback, just like we continuously see in real life. And, just like with Mujahideen and then the war on terror. And of course, there's a lot to be said for that, all that stuff. All of the events that are happening now are going to return. We know that it's all going to end up. I mean, that's part of the paradigm and the plan in the first place. But it's funny how audiences, movie audiences, and the general public and normies just forget about this stuff. Um, let's see. It says, let's see, on page 62, all your ridiculous, pitiful antics aren't going to change a thing. You and I were puppets in the same sick play. We serve the same master. And he's a lunatic and he's ungrateful, but there's nothing we can do about it. You and I were the same. In fact, Ryback may be more similar to Stranix than we're even allowed to know. When they come face to face, they immediately recognize each other, but it's never explained how. All we know that it's been a long time. So, in other words, again, we have the similarity between the good guy and the bad guy, just like Steven Seagal was very similar to William Forsythe's Richie character in terms of out for justice. Now we have him not only similar to Stranix and Tommy Lee Jones, we know that they're both also trained in all of these things and, covert ops, black ops, and even in hand to hand combat. They have this knife fight at the end, which is pretty ridiculous. But it is interesting how they do it. And then that's where Seagal ends up winning the knife fight against Tommy Lee Jones, stabbing him in the top of the head, and then shoving his head through a radar glass. He'd eliminated Gary Busey because he uses his small, skeleton crew to load the tomahawks and the starburst. Those are just 7-inch starburst uh, into the guns, and then they target this submarine that the bad guys are using to load the tomahawks on to take them, offshore. And the submarine is what had Gary Busey on board. The movie ends though with a scene where they return the ship and then they honor the captain in a full ceremony. Also, Steven Seagal's, I noticed at the end of the movie, giving a weird salute. His fingers are all gnarled in his salute, if you notice that. He's almost got David Icke fingers in his salute. But this is one of those movies where it's also programming the public for, the just clear existence of things like SEAL Team 5. He says SEAL Team 5 is on the way. Your job, Casey Ryback, if I can't stop you, then I damned as well might, support you in getting, preparing the way for SEAL Team 5 to land. And of course, they get shot out of the sky. Um, let's see. This mentions Andrew Davis again was the director. He's the one who directed The Fugitive and Above the Law. He was taking a step into the mainstream by doing a big studio movie like this. I mean, this is a huge studio movie, and it was his biggest success. Um, Seagal's biggest success, partnership with MIC. He'd already directed Tommy Lee Jones in The Package and would soon direct him to a Best Supporting Actor Oscar in The Fugitive. The Package is a movie that probably not a lot of people have seen. That's a pretty good movie. Again, revelatory because we get Green Berets and we get the military in Germany, and then we get um, a rogue guy going paramilitary, uh, MK Delta assassin mode on a politician in the guise of Tommy Lee Jones, who is he has a notable. I've always remembered that movie because it has a notable weapon. It's got the Steyr AUG Austrian sniper rifle in it. And Gene Hackman's really good in that movie. Um, It also I think the assassination is supposed to take place in that movie in Chicago, and remember that was where, uh, the big 1963 event was supposed to take place, was in Chicago before it was moved to Dallas. Um, let's see. We also got we get some interesting things here at the end. Oh, yeah, there's a great speech by, um, Gary Busey where he tells them to after he locks up Ryback in the meat locker, Ryback, listen, Ryback is an extreme psychopath. He hates officers. He hates America. He has him locked up in the meat locker. Ryback is correct that the guy guarding him is brainwashed and needs to learn to question authority. That plays a role in there's a new series that I just watched. I watched it because it was like a free week on whatever I have. And it's a British series about the long range desert group, beginnings of SAS. It's called like Rogue Warriors or something. I watched it because it was fun. But one of the things that is essential to understanding, like, from our point of view, um, these these paramilitary groups and these special forces groups is they always have this thing. It's in all the books and all the stuff about questioning authority because they're supposed to be maintaining a core mission and um, a sense of teamwork and a mission towards whatever assassination they're going to accomplish. But that was big, and that's like one of the major themes in that TV show that I just watched. It's worth watching. It's pretty fun. Because you don't often get shows about SAS. You mainly get them about SEALs and all this stuff. Um, so it was interesting watching about Long Range Desert Group and Patty Main. Patty Main was an Ulsterman, and how they formed SAS. SAS also appears in one of the biggest examples of SAS. There's two. One is in Killer Elite, which is based on a book by Randall Fiennes, who was Ray Fiennes' uncle, who was an SAS member who wrote The Feathermen. That's a great movie. That's Jason Statham. It's got Robert De Niro in it, and they're basically, ex SAS and ex Special Forces mercenaries involved in working for a shady Middle Easterner. And there's SAS training in it in Wales. That's a good movie. It's a good action movie. Really, one of the best action movies I think in the last 20 years, Killer Elite. It's a remake of another Killer Elite movie, but it takes a completely different storyline. The other one is when the SAS appears as the assassination hit squad to take out Sean Bean and his group uh, Splinter Provo IRA members in Patriot games. Remember they get the SAS to take him out in the desert group. And they watch from satellite. Um the last movie I'm going to cover briefly is Executive Decision. I'll say that Under Siege I'm not going to cover Under Siege 2 because it's whatever. It's got Katherine Heigl in it, which is, she's my age and she was pretty hot back then. But but Under Siege 2 is interesting because it's got the element of the train. And of course, that is relevant right now because of polyvinyl chlorate and white noise. But the terrorists hijack a train from which they're going to do their terrorist activities. And then, yes, I said Ray Fiennes. Yes, Toledo. Ray Fiennes and his uncle Ranulph Fiennes, who was a real SAS guy. Um, and then, so that's Under Siege 2 Dark Territory, which also the bad guy in that is played by Eric Bogosian. And I met Eric Bogosian because Eric Bogosian's a playwright. He wrote the great play Suburbia, which is like a great Gen X play that I saw a guy I know who's a professional actor named he went to my school. He's one of my friends, Justin Dre, who's a probably the great probably the best actor. He went on to he's a professional actor right now. And Justin Dre is the funniest person I've ever met in real life. And he went on to be a professional actor, but I saw him perform in this play Suburbia in the early 2000s, and it's probably the best play I've ever seen performed live. And Eric Bogosian wrote that, and I met Eric Bogosian at outside the Public Theater in New York when I was living there because he was directing a play. I forget what play it was, but it had Sam Rockwell in it. And I met Eric Bogosian just walking in the theater. But he plays the bad guy in Under Siege 2, Dark Territory. Okay, so Executive Decision is the final one that we're gonna talk about. And Executive Decision is interesting because it's not a Steven Seagal vehicle, but he has a strong presence in the movie, and the movie is obviously starring Kurt Russell, and then Holly Berry is in the movie. Um, but is it Holly Berry? It is Holly Berry, isn't it? Or was that Passenger 57? I can't remember. It seems like she's in 2 plane movies. Somebody tell me, is Holly Berry in Executive Decision? Whoever it is, there's a love interest and they go on a date at the end. But this movie is interesting because number 1, it has it is predictive in a number of ways. When Big 9 happened, a lot of people thought about this movie because number 1, the tourists are Middle Eastern. They hijacked the plane. They are not doing the thing that they did Big 9. They are hijacking it to get somebody else released. And the bad guy's played by David Suchet Poirot, who's a great bad guy in this. Where is the passenger manifest? Where is it? Where is it? It's also got JT Walsh. JT Walsh is amazing. I love JT Walsh. RIP JT Walsh. He is so awesome. He was in A Few Good Men, and JT Walsh is like, and he was in Breakdown. Remember, he played the psycho in Breakdown, Kurt Russell's Breakdown. JT Walsh is cool because like he always looks the same and he always kind of plays a similar character, but he's always heavy. You always believe JT Walsh is the guy that he's playing. Um, so it's a shame that he died. Um, I mean, I guess he had a heart attack, but he's great in this movie because he plays like a senator on board who gets murked on the plane. Also, it's got the plane is an Oceania flight, which is a fictional airline that was used in the show Lost. And I just remember when I was watching Lost and I saw the first episode and I said, that's an Oceania. And it's the same plane in this, which is not unusual to have this fictional airline. But um, Steven Seagal is a U.S. Army Special Forces counterterrorist strike team leader, Lieutenant Colonel Austin Travis. And he is sent to recover a stolen Soviet nerve toxin called DZ5. He fails in his mission, and so that is what they then have on the airplane. Um, and next we meet Dr. David Grant. Dr. David Grant is the name of my um, professor of drama when I was at school, which is weird. It's not probably a pretty usual name, but whatever. Kurt Russell is a kind of a there's a class warfare thing going on here because they're both powerful, they're both involved in intelligence, but Kurt Russell plays the guy who is an East Coast Yale, Yali elite guy who's involved in intelligence and who is the one his job is basically to send people like Steven Seagal on their missions. And even when they meet each other, he's in a tuxedo. So we have this contrast and this dichotomy between Steven Seagal in his uniform and he's in his camis versus Kurt Russell, who's in his black tie, and he looks at him and he's like, "Come on, man, really, this guy?" And of course, Kurt Russell is very preppy looking and wears his glasses the whole movie, and then only transforms later on in the movie when he has to board the plane himself, led by Seagal. They realize that the best way to deal with this situation is to try to board the plane and hijack it from the inside midair, which is weird because the plane is just coming from like Europe and it has like an 8 to 12 hour window to do this. How are they going to get on a plane and then board the plane and do all this stuff when clearly the guys who are in charge back at the war room are supposed to be Cheney like characters who would obviously just order the shoot down. Just in 2 seconds they would do that. But they don't do that on in this movie. And he completes his transformation when he has to when Kurt Russell changes into a black hoodie and has a gun with a silencer and shoots the bad guy. And they also have Oliver Platt. Oliver Platt is a DARPA guy. Again, we get the appearance of DARPA in a movie, but he's in the movie they call it, it's when DARPA went to ARPA. So ARPA has a bomb expert who is Oliver Platt, who was in the movie Flatliners, and he's on board along with John Leguizamo, who has stories about Seagal, and who played a small role in one of the earlier movies, and also the guy who plays the scientist in Terminator 2, right? Dyson. Dyson is the guy who's supposed to disarm the bomb, but gets injured and sort of acts in a way very similar to Terminator 2, where he's, breathing. And finally, Oliver Platt stops the magnetic bomb by putting his little coffee stirrer in between the thing, which is a weird plot point. But they end up saving the plane. Kurt Russell lands the plane, and a lot of the people survive. They've killed all the bad guys, minus right. They've all survived. Sans Steven Seagal, who sacrifices himself in the transfer from the however they boarded the plane onto the plane. They use like an oil chute, and he dies. Now that's the end of Steven Seagal's really reign of great movies, and it's interesting that he ends it with a major motion picture, one that is so predictive in terms of its, all of its big themes and stuff that happens in real life, and also that he has very little screen time in the movie. So probably, he was forced to do the movie because of some sort of contractual obligation, but at least he gets a noble role out of it, but it also is the movie where he dies. And so with him dying in this movie dies the sort of golden age of Steven Seagal. Now he had to come back with, Exit Wounds and all that. But Exit Wounds is an interesting movie because it's like a John Woo, 2000s sort of action movie vehicle where it just becomes sort of unreality and it's unlike the other Seagal movies. So that thus ends the story of Steven Seagal. This book is funny because it ends with a review. It talks again about the two sides of Nico Toscani, and it ends with the review of Steven Seagal's band, um, and a concert that they did in Seattle in 2006. And uh, I I mean, if they toured, I would go see him. Wouldn't you go see Seagal in concert? But that's not gonna happen because now I guess he's in Russia and all that stuff. So that's about it for Steven Seagal. Man, we what have we been going about 3 hours here? So thank you guys, appreciate it. We did Above the Law, Nico. We did Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, Out for Justice, um, Under Siege, and Executive Decision. If I had to put these in order of best movie to I guess least best, they're all pretty good, all 6 of these. I would say Out for Justice is 1, then Above the Law, then probably I guess Under Siege, then Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, and Executive Decision. But Executive Decision and Under Siege don't really even fit into that sort of pattern. Um, all the movies are very different, and they all did have pretty revelatory themes. But all in all, they were fun, right? So if you like action movies, I guess watch his movies, and this is a pretty good book describing them. So that's about it for that. Let's see if we have any other comments or super chats thrown in. Thank you to everybody who's supported us, supported me. I really appreciate you. Again, thanks to Jonathan for sponsoring a stream coming up. Thanks to the real John Connor. Again, thanks to let's see. Thanks to Jason for that $5 PayPal. Thanks to Amptown for that dono chat. And then of course, again, we got those super chats from Herman, Charisma, Pim, and Nico. Oh, shouts out to Genghis for that last one on the last stream. And I forgot to mention that Seagal's big movie that he really wanted to do that was never made is a Genghis Khan biopic. He really wanted to play Genghis Khan. So I don't think that's ever going to happen. But shouts out to the real Genghis Khan out there who supported us last time. Also, shouts out to Elias for that $20 super chat, and again to Amptown for that dono chat. Really appreciate you. So that's about all I got, you guys. Please like the stream if you like it. Share, share it out. Stay tuned for this week. We got some big stuff coming up. We've got Titus Andronicus, Thomas Harris, Kari Mora, Mechanical for Leibowitz, Cormac McCarthy, The Keep. We've got Paul Thoreau, Mosquito Coast, and then we've got the Wes Anderson films coming up. We got a lot coming up. So that's about all I got, you guys. I love y'all. Thank you so much for being here with me. And you can take that to the bank, to the blood bank. All right. Peace. Love y'all. Peace. Wait, hold on. One more thing. Shouts out to Mav out there who sends $20, $20 super chat. Thank you for that last minute super chat. Really appreciate you. Thank you, Mav. That's very kind of you. Really appreciate it. Glad I got that in. So thank you so much for your support. Really appreciate it. Oh, and before I forget, yeah, our friend Rachel has a big interview coming up. She'll be with well, maybe I shouldn't say before she announces it, but she's got a big interview coming up. Rachel, based homeschool mom. Check out Church of the Eternal Logos. Our homeboy David Patrick Harry. We just did Fallen with him. We've got Real Cooter Brown, Digital Minefield might be on his show tomorrow night if we can make time for it. Because we got a bunch of other streams coming up. So we might be on there. Shouts out to all our homies out there. And I don't know what y'all are going to do for the rest of the night. I am going to chill, and there was some movie on that I was just about to watch. But I can't remember. So anyway, that's about all I got, you guys. Now I'm just babbling. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you. Peace. Love you.